Friends, fans, and fine folk, grab your drinks and snacks and come on down round the campfire for this short rest with me and my friend Guy from How to Be a Great GM. And I actually pointed the right way for once. I mean, I'm a totes professional streamer, so I get it right every single time, of course. Hi, Guy. How you going?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you very much for making the time to come chat with me around the campfire, as it were.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, and it's good to see people coming in. I know this is not my usual time for doing these short rest streams, but that's because Guy outrageously has a good work-life balance and prefers to not work on a weekend. How dare he? How dare!
No, I dare. But that's what happens when you get old and fat. You know.
you need to stop putting in rules, and then you're like, you know what?
Exactly.
I'm not going to do this anymore. Yeah. And people are like, oh, I guess we'll work around that. Yeah,
no, I've done my 3 a.m. stints. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've
done the duty.
I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy you bring that up immediately because I was going to talk about that later. When one of the first times one of my go-to examples of me not being a morning person and knowing that and standing up to what I believe in occasionally is when you got in touch with me and was like, hey, do you want to be a part of an actual play? Like it was a short, was it like 10 episodes of something? I can't even remember. But you got in touch and I was like, holy shit, Guy Scland just got in touch with me to ask me to play with him. I've been watching his stuff since before I was making my own. This is one of the dreams come true, but also he's suggesting like 5 a.m. on a Monday morning, so no, I'm not doing that. And I had to say, like, I'd love to, man. I'd love to. Another time, but that's not happening. I'm not a morning person, and that's outside of my working hours.
Yes.
Whereas our mutual friend Dead Aussie Gamer would have jumped to any hour of any day. He's constantly in my chats at like 3 in the morning at something, and I'm like, that's obscene. But I'm going to still take advantage of it. Well, it's great to have you here for this short rest. So if we are short resting, what are we in the midst of that needed a short rest? What are we on a mission of some kind, or are we doing side quests?
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. The quest that we are on is one of grave importance, absolute grave.
Of course. Oh, as they all are. Even
they always are.
Even the side quests to collect mushrooms, they're always grave importance. So at least you have to tell.
Well, we need those 12 mushrooms, otherwise little Timmy's going to die.
Exactly. So, and if Timmy dies, that they're the fates, the acolyte of the god of fate has said that Timmy's important for the rest of mankind.
That's right. Or at least we need him tomorrow because he's got to pick potatoes.
We're definitely not just manipulating you gullible adventurers into doing our gardening for us.
Exactly. So that's exactly what we're doing. Is we're on a grave quest to find this ancient library that contains within it this fabulous tome written by a druid, and the tome describes exactly how one would grow the perfect mushroom.
I see.
So that
and we've been sent on this quest, Timmy. And we found this library, or we've not.
No, I don't think we're that competent. I don't think we're there yet.
We're still just wondering. Let's be honest. We're both GMs. We know how it goes. We're still like 2 episodes in the town where we got given the quest.
Yes.
Just wandering around taverns and things, and half forgetting what we were meant to be doing and which direction the library was. And
I think you got it.
So we're short resting in the tavern.
The short rest is in the tavern.
Wonderful. So anybody who doesn't know what the hell we're doing here, Short Rest is sort of a chat series where we just chat about D&D. What are we going to be drinking in this short rest, both in real life and out of real life? I'm just drinking water, as per my usual.
Yes, I'm also just drinking water. I'm afraid it's too hot in the UK for anything else at the moment, and it's also not even noon yet, so I think I'd be shouted at if I did anything else. But the tavern, certainly. I think the tavern. Well, I'm partial to cider myself.
Oh, yeah.
Probably drinking cider.
Is that usually your character's go-to? Or does it depend on the character?
Characters go to and real life go to as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think my
history, so.
My characters you tend to go with just a straight ale or a mead unless I'm playing something where I want to make a point of their drink, in which case it's usually something like fruity or something. I'll be like, oh, give me something colourful.
Give me
Elven
something
wine or
really.
something.
Yes. There's an event that I go to where they have all of these drinks called Dragon's Breath and Venom of the Hydra, and the Dragon's Breath is actually smoking when you drink it. They have to the whole staff do this whole very delicate balancing of a flame and some oak wood or some type of wood. I don't know what it is exactly. They set that on fire and they put that in the drink, and they put the whole drink in a glass jar. It's this whole production, and they bring it through to you, and they lift the jar off, and the smoke just pours out of this drink, and then you
Jeez.
drink it, and it tastes vaguely smoky. I don't know.
I was just telling a story yesterday about how I went to a Viking themed restaurant Mjolnir in Melbourne when I went for PAX Australia last year. And I went with our friend Dag, Dead Aussie Gamer, and he ordered this drink where they had to pour this like from two metal goblets they were pouring back and forth with whatever it was, brandy, port, and it was super heated, so that as they're pouring it, it eventually just spontaneously combusts and it's flaming as they're pouring it back and forth, and it's a hell of a spectacle. And then they pour it into this like champagne flute and hand it to him, and he immediately sips it and burns himself because of course he does. It's on fire. And then he takes one sip of it, hands it around to everybody else to take a sip as well, just to sort of like experience what this thing is. And before he gets to drink the rest of his very expensive, very flamboyantly presented flaming drink, he puts it on the table between us, turns to talk to somebody else, and then turns back and knocks it with his elbow all over me. And he didn't even get to drink his flaming hot crazy drink. So I think that's what I'm drinking at this short rest at this tavern.
Okay. All right. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. For people who've seen my short rests before, I like to start by talking about names. How to be a great GM is relatively straightforward, but is there any secret stories behind that? With how many iterations did it go through before you decided on it?
I don't think there were many, because it started when YouTube was still young and fresh, and everyone was still experimenting and thinking what they could do with this strange platform. No, the origin of it was quite simply that I wanted to make a YouTube channel to prove that everybody could be a great GM, and that this channel was going to show you how to do that. So it was pretty straightforward. And in all seriousness, I mean, this was 8 years ago that we started the channel, so the name was available.
Yeah.
But ironically, the name was not available on other platforms.
Oh, really?
So yes, and this was also before the days of brand cohesion and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So people were still exploring Discord didn't exist back then, and Twitter was still this new thing, and so it was interesting. So we're one of those old brands where it's like, well, yes, it's how to be a great GM on YouTube, but it's how to GM on Twitter, and then it's great GM on Patreon, and it's this and that. It's like.
It's why, that's when it becomes very important to have like a link tree or just a
yes.
a
Exactly. Well, in today's circumstances,
a domain.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Where it's everything's just together. Thankfully I was new enough that and being that I used my own name as my brand, I'm just Robert Hartley GM on everything. Robert Hartley GM is the podcast, the Patreon, the Discord, everything. Very useful. So you knew from the beginning enough to make it Games Master rather than Dungeon Master in the branding. That was a specific choice you made?
It was a specific choice because I think my exposure to role-playing, I was lucky in one way, but I was unlucky in another. Lucky in one way because when I started going to the conventions that caused me to start the channel in the first place, they were running multiple modules on multiple role-playing systems. And what you did was you just signed up to be a GM, and you could say, well, I'd quite like to run this module, because they give you a list of the modules with a little bit of a description on them. But sometimes they'd forget to tell you what system they were using.
So you just had to know a lot of different systems? Or?
Well, what would happen is sometimes they go, well, you signed up to run that D&D one, but we've got 5 GMs who are running that one already. So we've assigned you to this Warhammer 40K. Oh. And I had a fantastic mentor where I got given this 40K module, and I said, I vaguely know what 40K is
Mm.
because it's based on StarCraft, or StarCraft was actually based on it, but I didn't know that at the time.
Right, right, right.
I've never run the system. How does it work? He's like, it's percentile. They roll below the number on their sheet, they succeed. They roll above it, they fail.
Yeah.
Go. Everyone must die. I'm like, okay, cool. And so then I ran a 3-hour module. But what it did was it exposed me to a lot of different systems that I would never have played normally anyway,
Right,
because I
right.
had come from second edition D&D, and so I was a D&D fanatic,
Mm.
really. Um, and every one of those systems uses a different name. They use a
Yeah.
narrator or
Yeah.
storyteller or
Yeah.
referee
Yeah.
or
Yeah, it gets a
et
lot.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It does. So I thought, Game Master comes in quite handy. The challenge with that, though, is that occasionally we do get people coming on who say, "I don't see you playing any games," and I'm like, "No, no, no.
Right.
This is not computer games. This is
Yeah,
this is
okay.
this is role playing games." So, but that's very
Huh.
seldom. People seem to,
Do you
watch
do you
one
get
episode and they know what's going on.
do you get any pushback on the word game master itself? Because I found in the last year or so, a lot of people are saying like, oh, they don't like the term because master has connotations that they don't necessarily
Sure.
like.
I haven't ever had that in terms of not wanting to be called a master or a mistress or a whatever it would be.
Yeah.
The pushback that we have is that people don't know what a GM is. So a lot of the D&D community that have never been exposed to any of that kind of role playing will go, well, what's a GM? I know what a DM is.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so that has been something that we've debated for a long time, is should we change it to DM because that would tap into the biggest market?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're like, well, our advice is predominantly system agnostic.
System
So
agnostic. Yeah.
let's just stick with something that's slightly different. Does it hurt us? I don't know, but it's what we are. So
Yeah. I have a feeling that like people searching for how to be a great DM are gonna come across your stuff. It's not like it's
absolutely.
gonna. Yeah.
I mean,
It's
our search tags and things.
yeah, the
we've got
tags are always
DM
going to
and
have
GM
DM
and all that kind
and
of stuff.
Dungeons
Yeah,
and
of course,
Dragons
of
and all
course.
that stuff.
Yeah,
So I don't think it's going to be that helpful to you to change it. I think if anything, it would be more hindering, wouldn't it? Because the people who are
well,
very
all the
vocally
brand.
against Dungeons and Dragons
Yes,
because
yes.
it's
Oh,
cool
absolutely.
it's cool to not to buck the trends and to be sort of hipster and go for different things, even with the very niche industry of nerdy tabletop role players. Like, I have to be the nerdiest of the nerdy, so I have to play this one that nobody's ever heard of. Yeah, so I think they'd be like put off by the any sort of a DM
Yeah,
branding. So you
correct.
mentioned before you started with second edition. That's the first
Yeah,
D&D
that was.
edition that you played?
Well, technically, it was the red box, which was just advanced
Oh right.
D&D, but we only
Yeah, yeah,
played the first adventure in that one,
right.
and that was just because it was something that a friend's brother had. We found it and were playing it in the library. But once we actually, and that was sort of the very first introduction to it. But when we actually started playing, it was second edition, right the way through, and we did the whole pushback of third edition when it came out. We're like, no, we're not going to play third edition. Second edition is perfect, and then we slowly moved on to the third edition.
Did
And
you
went
experience the
through
same again with
process.
3.5 and 4?
Well, 3.5, we love 3.5. And 4, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. I think it was fortunately for Dungeons and Dragons as a brand, but fortunately, Paizo had released Pathfinder,
Right.
and Pathfinder was based on 3.5.
Yeah.
And I always call it 3.75.
Yeah, a lot of people I've heard a lot of
That's
people refer to it as
pretty
that.
much what it was, right?
Yeah.
So we had switched to Pathfinder because supposedly it was only going to be one book that you ever needed.
Right.
We all went, yeah, sure, 'cause that's how publishing companies
That's how
work.
published, yeah. Yeah.
So we
I
were
said
on
the same when with all of
3.75.
them saying basically the same about 1D&D. Like it'll be the last
Oh yes,
it'll be the end of all
absolutely.
editions. Yeah,
Yeah,
like they
yeah,
said for
yeah.
Microsoft 10 or whatever every time
Exactly,
there's any of that. It's like, yep,
exactly,
sure. Believe it when we see it.
Yes, that's not how the planet works, unfortunately. Yeah, so when fourth edition came out, we tried it, but I think fourth edition probably would work if it was released next year. I don't think it worked when it was released,
Right.
because of the mechanics that they chose. And looking back at fourth edition, there's part of me which goes, you know what? I think they were actually onto something. But we as the community weren't ready for it.
Yeah, they were. It was before the community was ready. In what
Yeah.
ways exactly?
Well, the fourth edition, and this is going back to when it first launched. I don't know when that was. It must have been, what, 2000, somewhere around about there. I'm sure someone can figure out the dates. But when it first came out, it
was
just
somewhere
felt
around
like, yeah, they had sort of cut out the role playing aspect and had just replaced it with, I'm playing cards. I'm playing my, because you had combat abilities, you had non-combat abilities, you had daily powers, and you had this and you had that, but they were represented as cards, which I think was forward thinking in terms of, well, people will just buy the cards rather than having to check the character sheet all the time. But certainly for us, growing up in South Africa, there was very little money to be spent on the rule books as well as on any extras. So it was really just suddenly you had all these reference cards that you had to write out or to print out or whatever. And it felt like they had tried to capture World of Warcraft as a role-playing game.
Right.
In terms of you have your powers, and it felt more like an MMO, which, like I said, today I think might work a little bit better. If you look at things like D&D Beyond and that sort of thing, you don't care whether the character's abilities are presented as a card or as a this or as a that. You just want it to be able to work, and you can click on it and it goes through. So I think that was the problem, was that the cards suddenly took you away from role playing, because now you were almost playing a game of cards with minis. I think that was their problem. That certainly was for me. And we had Pathfinder, and Pathfinder worked beautifully. And then 5th edition came out, and my players loved 5th edition. I've never liked 5th edition personally.
Interesting.
I don't. There are lots of things that I do like about it, that they've streamlined and that they've codified abilities and those kinds of things. But I feel like all that they did was they said, okay, we are going to make combat the most important thing of this game. And so as a result, combat will take an hour because everyone's got so many things that they can do. And the DM is basically just going to have their hands tied whilst they wait for the player characters to finish going through their bonus actions and
You got an action, a bonus action, a movement, and a reaction. But if you use your bonus action to do this, you get 2 actions. And if you have this cast on you, then when you take an action to do this, you can do that twice. But it's only 1 action to do it twice. And then you're going, all right, well, that was 10 minutes and it's after your round. Just the other day, I had a game, and it's not even that high level. I think they're level 9, and we had a combat where the guy had asked, one of the guys in the party had asked, "Can we finish at 11 p.m?" And I was like, "Sure." And we got to like 11, and I was like, "All right, we're in the middle of this fight, but we are at the top of the round. Top of the round is always a nice place to leave it. We'll come back to this next time. I'll take photos of everything." And he goes, "We'll go one more round." And I wasn't really keeping a track of time because I'm keeping track of everything else. But I did notice when we got back to the top of the round, I went, all right, top of the round again. It's 11:40. It had taken 40 minutes to get through 1 round of combat. I was like, well, Jesus. and then obviously he was like, oh, we'll just go one more. We'll just go one more round.
Of course.
It's like you were the one who asked to come.
Right?
No, I'll just go to the end. Just go to the end. It doesn't matter. I'll just be tired tomorrow. It's fine. Yeah, so you find that earlier editions weren't like that with the combat? It wasn't so time-consuming, or it wasn't
them being
so much
as laborious,
right?
Personally, it could also be just because I was younger, but I remember 2nd edition combats being life or death types of encounters. Yeah. 3rd edition and 1st edition Pathfinder, I remember just them being fun. And I don't remember ever being able to go, okay, I've got 5 players, they're going to fight 5 equal creatures. Okay, that's going to take an hour. Yeah. Because in 5th edition, it'll take an hour. And you're like, okay, great. It's actually a tactic that I use because I run these paid games. And you paid to play for a certain amount of time, a certain, 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever it might be. And I will sit there and I'll go, you know what? I don't really feel like doing much story evolution and role playing and all that. So,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm just going to give them a combat, and that's
I'll
going to
give them a
take an
combat.
hour and a half.
Yeah.
And then they're going to finish their combat. Do I feel like doing role playing? No, I'll just give them another combat. There we go. There's my 4 hours. Thanks very much for playing. Goodbye. See you next week.
It's remarkably effective as a a stalling technique, essentially. Like if I'm overworked, I'm too busy, I've overcommitted myself to too many jobs, and then I've got a paid game tonight, I'd be like, I am not well prepped for this game tonight. Oh, but they are going from one town to another, so there is a chance of a random combat there. I'll just give them a combat, and I'll look at my minis, and I'll be like, what will take a while? I'll throw them against a couple of manticores and whatever, and I'll take up most of the game. And it's disappointing whenever I have to do that, but I know that it's a possibility because of how the game works and how long combat can take. And then usually the good thing about that for me is that while the combat is taking a while and while they're talking amongst themselves about what to do or strategizing, I can put some thinking into what happens after this combat. What is actually the lore that I need to drop to make this combat not just some random useless piece of nonsense, but actually has some tie into the story. Why is it that the manticores are here, and what can the manticores have on them or whatever?
Yes, absolutely. And my one group, I don't think that they know that that's my tactic. If I like it. What I find ironic is that most of the time I'll go, okay, I'm just going to do a big combat, and just before I launch the combat, one of them will do something so out of left field that I go, oh, I actually now am much more interested in where this goes than in the combat I had planned to stall with. So now we go down that rabbit hole and off we go. And other times where they'll go, this is a straightforward conversation. They literally just need to say one sentence and leave, and suddenly we're in a 2-hour fight. And you're like, okay, I wanted to move forward.
I didn't expect for this to happen, but you did it. And then I tried to maneuver around it, and then you forced this thing, which
you just kept going at it.
Picking at that scab. So, which would you say your favourite is as a player and a GM? Are they different editions? You prefer the rules as a player to one or the other? Edition of D&D.
I like playing in Cthulhu, or at least I like the percentile system.
Yes, I do like percentile system, and I also like that if you fail, you get experience in Cthulhu, right? You're
correct.
The ones that you failed in at the end of the episode, if you're still alive, you get one point better in it or something, right? Which isn't 1% is not a lot, but it accrues. Which I always kind of like about any game. It's just generally good game design. It's like, we learn more from our failures than our successes. So if you are succeeding at something a lot, then clearly you don't need to get better at that thing. Why are you getting XP for successfully killing the monsters? I like things like Monster of the Week, where it's like if you fail a roll, at least you mark an experience, and you're like, well, you failed that thing, meaning you need to get better at it, so you get experience in it. I do like the
exactly. So I think there's a lot to be said for that percentile system. I don't get to play it often enough. And as a DM, I think if you were to say to me, right, tomorrow you're going to be playing your last role-playing game ever, I mean, that would be such a tough decision. But I would almost be inclined to say, you know what, we're going to play Star Wars using the West End D6 system.
Okay.
Which is from 1987. I mean, it's one of the few role-playing books that I still have from my teenage years that I've dragged across the planet.
Wow.
Not an amazing system, but at one point...
What's the basics?
Because what happens is...
You say it's a D6 system?
It's so your character, you get these points... basically in skills. There's six abilities. I cannot remember what they are off the top of my head, but they basically strength, dexterity, and then there's like engineering and stuff. It's the usual kind of thing. But as you put these points in, slowly you start to get pluses. So +1, +2, +3, and then you get a whole new die. So you might have 3d6 +2 in engineering. So then you would roll 3d6 and you'd add 2. The challenge is if you play a campaign, by the end of the campaign, you are rolling 15d6 +3, and you have to add them and
So
compare them with
it's not one of
everybody
these
else.
D6 systems where it's like a pool of dice and you just have to get a certain number of sixes or something.
No, no, no,
It's
no, no.
it's
No,
actually
this is
you
this
add
is
it all
just
together.
just add it all together. So if a player throws a whole bunch of d6s in front of me, and they're the old-fashioned ones with the
Pips. Yeah.
dots, not with the numbers,
Yeah,
with the
pips.
dots, I can
You can Rain Man
pretty
it.
much kind of Rain Man it in a
Yeah.
way. It's like, that's about 52 or maybe 53. And they'll sort of count it and they'll go, well, it's 55. I'm like, it
I
really
was
doesn't matter at
I
this
was
point.
close enough. Yeah, at that point with those
It
sorts
was
of numbers.
close enough to be able to move forward. No, the reason why I think that is pure nostalgia,
Yeah.
because the last time I played that was we were in our final year of high school, about to go into university, supposedly writing the most important exams of our lives. And we would write the exam in the morning, because that's just the system that we used.
Yeah.
And then in the afternoon, we'd all cycle to a mate's house. We'd play Star Wars until 6 p.m. Tell our folks, no, we've been studying. It's a study group. It's all seriously studying. And the parents never twigged that most of us were actually writing exams for different subjects.
We've just been
Because
general studies.
but it was just general studying. We were just getting smarter. So, yeah, so I suppose it would be that.
That's brilliant.
Very simple system too. Yeah.
So, tell me about the start of your channel. You started it out on YouTube first, and
Yes.
how long were you on YouTube before you started anything else? Did you see growth immediately? Did you see, like, back in the early days of YouTube, there was not a lot of other people making content like you, so you saw quite a lot of growth?
Well, it was definitely that. So, yeah, the long and short of it was we put up 2 videos, which we shared amongst the local South African role-playing community. And that's as far as it went, and that's as far as we expected it to go.
Yeah.
And for months, probably 6 months or so, it was going up, and sort of 400 views, 405, 406.
Just those
And then
videos? Like
it was just those 2 videos. Because I didn't make more, because at the time I was working in television.
Right.
And so if you watch those first 2 clips, I had a cameraman and a sound man present, and we had done it as if I was doing an interview.
Right.
Which was not financially sustainable, but that was the only way that I knew how to make content.
Yeah.
The notion of using your cell phone was I mean, it was just insane. So this is what we'd sort of done, and someone shared one of the videos on Reddit. And this was when Reddit, I think, was sort of at its peak of being a happy place, where people were trying to help each other.
Yeah.
And trying to grow. I think it still does that, but it's quite a difficult community, I find anyway. And overnight we had 2,500 views on the one video, and
they're still on the...
Sorry, 2,500 subscribers joined.
Oh wow.
The channel. Yeah. So suddenly we rocketed up into the space of, hey, and in those days YouTube, I think it was once you had 1,000 subscribers, that was it. You got status, or you got your own channel link or something along those lines.
Yeah, I remember there
And
being
that
something about 1,000.
triggered me to go, aha, let me make more videos.
Right.
And more videos. But we were still doing it part-time. After work, you'd go and record a video or this or that. And occasionally we'd record a video going, hi guys, there's no video this week because work sucked. See you next week. So we did that for quite a long time. And then really it was, I would say, once I was stuck in Tokyo, I quit my job in Tokyo that I was there for, and I had nothing to do, no means of income, and could not become the standard English teacher in Japan, because again, I'm a very large person and I'm a very hairy person. Those are not 2 attributes that will put you high in the job listings in Tokyo. So I said to my business partner, I'm doing this full time. Can we do it? And he's like, well, sure, if you want to get a salary that's less than if you were packing Amazon boxes.
Yeah.
And I said, let's do it. And that's when I had enough time then to write the first book, which sold phenomenally well. And kind of kickstarted the whole idea of, okay, let's take this thing seriously.
Right.
And at the same time, Wizards of the Coast reached out to me for various reasons, and I was running streams for them. And so it was like, okay, we can seriously see this thing working well enough for at least me to go full time,
Yeah.
and for my business partner to go part time, and for it to cover our costs.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what happened. And once I moved to the UK, I was focusing on the book production more than anything else, and that's been really good for us. And we said, okay, well now we can do a podcast, and we can do this, and we can do that, we can do the next thing, and that's really been the journey, and quite an amazing journey too. But still, it's not. We're not living in giant mansions in the
Yeah.
center of London. For example, we were just at UK Games Expo, which had 33,000 unique people going through the doors. It's the first convention where we've broken even in terms of sales of books versus cost of attending a convention.
Right.
So we're getting to a point now where it's like, okay, people know who we are,
Yeah.
and they're willing to invest in our products and stuff. But also, we now have enough product to make it sustainable. Because I think this is what a lot of people don't realize is they go, oh, let's go into YouTube, let's make a video or two, let's get famous, and we'll make money off of it. And you go, well, sure, but you've got lots of different streams coming in, or at least that certainly helps us in terms of maintaining a positive bank balance.
Yes.
So,
yeah, for sure. That's definitely the thing that I'm keeping aware of as well. Like my merchandise, I usually have I've got standard merchandise, kind of like this RH logo stuff that I'm wearing, but then I'll have temporary stuff come up on like my birthday or the anniversary of me streaming or something, and I will commission a different artist each year to make a couple of cool things, and then we'll put that out as temporary merch. And the merch will not even cover the cost of the artist sort of thing, but it's still just worth putting out just for the fun of putting it out there and having different merch. But it's something to definitely be aware of, because if you're going to actually be paying artists and you're going to be paying the musicians that are doing the music for your channel, and you're going to be paying people to do the overlays and things for you, then those things need to also pay for themselves essentially. Otherwise, you're doing it out of pocket. Yeah, so yes, people do tend to have the opinion of like, oh, you can start a YouTube channel and it costs you nothing, and it costs you nothing at first, but a lot of the costs are sort of hidden costs that you don't think about at first. Like, if you're doing your own editing, then fine, but how sustainable is it to be a one-man band?
Well,
Speaking
that's
of
something that we've just taken on, actually. Sorry, we've just hired an editor to do all of our edits of our work.
Wow, and before this,
it's been an absolute pleasure.
And it was before this, it was you.
Yeah.
Wow,
I was the one-man band.
I was going to say, like, at what point were you? Because you've been using sort of the we plurals, the plural pronouns from the beginning. Like, have you always been not just the one-man band of Great GM? How many people have worked on Great GM from the start?
Yeah, no. Initially, it was just myself, and once we started to get viewership coming in, I went, okay, I'm not a fay with website design and with brand promotion and social media. That wasn't something that I was familiar with. So the company I was working at the time, I was there as a creative lead for television projects and that sort of thing. But working with me, I had an animator who was also a very sharp programmer. He made websites and things, but also he's one of these folks who goes, you know what, I just want to see if I can test whether I can get 1,000 followers on Twitter overnight. And then he'd get 1,000 followers on Twitter overnight. And
just
so I said,
understands
okay,
the algorithm, understands how people
work.
work.
Well, exactly, because he likes to understand those processes and things. See? So I said, okay, well, why don't you join the team? And let's do it as a team. And then we brought in someone else who was going to do the social media for us as well. Right. So there were 3 of us initially, and then we were splitting the $12 a month profit between the 3 of us. But as you say, there's so many costs that people don't think about.
Yeah.
And eventually, the person doing social media with us was like, you know what, this is not for me. I'm going to go and do social media for another YouTube channel, actually. So she went off and did that, and then it was just the 2 of us. It's been just the 2 of us since then.
Wow.
So my business partner, he does all the finances, and with the books and stuff, he does all the distribution, because that is a nightmare in its own right. And he just leaves me to do the content.
Yeah.
which is great. And occasionally he'll go, you know what? What's the next book that you're thinking about doing? Oh, is that the right choice? Is it the wrong choice? And I'll go, Derek, I'm going to change my mind next week anyway. So there's no point in arguing now, you know. And he's like, okay. And he knows me because I've got 2 books that I'm actually currently working on 3 books. I've got technically it's 4.
Yeah,
but
I was going to say that
one's
number's
about
going
to
up. That number's going to keep going up if we keep thinking about it.
So the 4th one is there's 3 chapters left to edit. So I'm waiting for the editor to give me the feedback on that one. I've had 1 book which I wrote 2 years ago. It's about 60% written, but I got bored and I was like, yeah, I'll do something else.
Yeah.
I just started writing a fantasy novel with my Patreons, which is a very interesting journey. And I'm working on the next big Kickstarter, which is going to go out in September. So I like to have all of these different projects going because I get bored and I'm like, I don't feel like doing that today. What else can I do? Oh, Shiny. I'll do that one instead.
do this one.
Let's do that.
God, I know. I understand that. Is this ADHD or is this undiagnosed ADHD?
Probably it might be that. Mine is just a fear of death.
Right.
I have so much still to do that I have to do all of these things at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, but to be perfectly honest with you, I think the bottom line is I have always been someone who has created fantastical situations.
Yeah.
I think all of us have been the little 5-year-old kid running around pretending to be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle or this or that or the next thing. I think I've just stayed at that age. And now I just have more resources with which to make all of that nonsense happen. So it's like, oh, I can do it all. Okay, cool.
I was thinking this just like last year when I was filming D&D Logic, the Viva La Diddley D&D skit series that I did, comedy skits, and I was kind of the creative director on that, and I was like, I can play pretend, only now I can say, can you turn that copse of trees into like a goblin forest? And then I go off and talk to the technical director, and I talk to the actors and stuff, and then I turn around 5 minutes later and it looks like a goblin's camp, and I'm like, oh, yes. I have powers. I have powers to be like, hey, do this thing, to make that thing. We filmed some of the episodes in a huge church, and we walked in and I was like, can we move the pews to the side? And they were like, sure. And I was like, oh my God. Something beautifully metaphorical about walking into a church and feeling like a god.
Yes.
So you only just recently, after all of these years, you only just got an editor on to do that work for you.
Correct.
The first person I hired when I was able to actually just outsource was an editor because of how much time it was taking up.
It does take up a lot of time. And I also realized that as much as I have spent decades editing in my career, there's a new approach, a new wave, and the way that videos are released on YouTube, there's a specific style to them, right? Mm-hmm. And it's I don't want to call it a youthful style or a modern generation style. It's just the style of YouTube where there's little animatics that pop up. It's a playful way of working with the material.
Yeah.
And I can see when the editor does it, I'm like, yes, that's brilliant, that works, that's wonderful. Or, no, that's too much, pull back a little bit. Mm-hmm. But to do it myself, it's just not something that my head is capable of doing.
Yeah.
And so we've got this person in, they're using it as like a summer job thing where they're putting all these videos together. They're having a blast. They're earning some money. We're getting these videos. And if you watch the latest videos on the channel, people have been saying, hey, the editing is quite fun now. You're having a lot more fun with the editing. I'm like, I am, because I'm not doing it.
I'm not doing it. It's a lot more fun when you don't have to do it.
So much fun. Yes. I upload the files and 3 or 4 days later, a final video comes back to me. I'm like,
what was the sort of process of finding an editor that would gel with the content you make? Was it a case of they have to already be familiar with the stuff you do, but not a fan? Because that would be a weird dynamic to have a fan working for you, or what?
Well, generally speaking, that's the only type of people that we have ever worked with, are fans who've reached out and gone, hey, I've seen your content, I'd like to do this. So in the case of the editor, they reached out to me and said, "Oh, I'm a young editor. I would love to edit some of your videos for you."
I love your work, except for a big
And
list of things
yeah,
that they would change.
and I looked at it and I went, you know what? Our videos are, it's a talking head. That's all I do. Is for 20 minutes, it's just me talking, right?
Yeah.
And it can be a bit much. And we have tried over the years to change up those videos, to try and make them fresh and more interesting and that sort of thing. But it's always been my particular editing style that has been part of that.
Yeah.
Just because we've never had budget really to splash around on other things. And I said, you know what? Let's give this person a try, and sent them the first video, and it came back, and I was like, yeah, it's a bit rough, but it's actually, it made me laugh out loud on one of the jokes that I had made. I know it sounds crazy laughing at your own joke, but the way that he edited it made it funny.
Yeah.
Actually funny, as opposed to just a dad joke. I was like,
I got you.
oh, that's actually funny. I like that. And that was enough to say, okay, cool. Well, we'll give you a contract for 4. And he did all 4. And it just got better and better and better as he got more comfortable exploring the space and what he could push and what he couldn't push. I'm now at the point where I'm like, okay, I've sent you 8 videos that I have recorded. If you don't like any of them, just tell me and I'll re-record them. Because, you know, there's a certain... there's a dynamic that's coming in where I now realize, hey, the more animated I am, the more stuff I do, the more he can play with, and the faster and the sharper the video becomes, and I think it becomes more accessible as well. I mean, there might be fans who watch this and go, no, your videos have gotten worse. One fan did write, how much coffee did I drink before the video? Which personally I take as a compliment, because I have had people writing and saying, I use your videos to fall asleep at night.
He's so dull. It's a lovely soothing voice. Yeah, I get that a lot when I used to do Robert Reed's series, when I read books and things, and people are like, I fall asleep, and I'm like, well, I can get it because you're reading an audiobook or whatever, but still.
Yes.
Still, I'm literally being an entertainer online, and if you're falling asleep, it really tells you something about my entertainment.
Exactly. Just make sure if you fall asleep that you allow the ads in the middle to play all the way through.
Just turn on autoplay and repeat, and then fall asleep to it. Something came up then that I've now completely forgotten about. I think it was YouTube in general. How do you, or maybe you don't, how do you avoid falling into the trap of being swayed too much about the content you're making by the algorithm and the analytics and stuff? Do you put out a video that you're like, this is going to do well, it absolutely tanks, and then in future you decide, I'm not going to do content like that anymore? Do you allow yourself to be swayed by the videos that do well?
No. Obviously, I think as a business, you are always chasing the views, right? So if you release a video and you get 100,000 views, you're going, I'm going to do more of that.
More of that.
And I know for a fact, if I do a video where it's like, don't do this if you're a GM, or 10 bad habits of GMs, or you're an awful GM if, I know that video will do well.
Clickbaity kind
but there's only so many videos of that nature that you can release before
the BuzzFeed kind of articles of the
exactly,
lists of 10 and
correct. But so we know that those sort of exist. Really, for us, what was the most telling was when we tried to pivot away from the content that we had been doing. You know, as the pandemic kicked in, suddenly everybody could do a YouTube channel because they were at home, and everyone did, which I think is great. It opens up so many more options for people to go, you know what, he's too boring, he's to this, he's to that, she's to this, she's to that, they to this, they to that. I'm going to go and watch this instead. So there's definitely variety now, which is fantastic. What we have done is we're like, okay, well, let's try and do an animated version of the show. And people are like, no, great effort, but no. You know, or something that we definitely learned was April Fool's jokes. Was we tried an April Fool's joke and got so much negative commentary on that joke. We're like, huh, okay,
Missed the mark, I guess.
Won't do that ever again.
No
So those are the ones that we immediately drop and go, okay, never going to go back that way. And there haven't been many over the years, but definitely, and then there's some topics that we just won't touch. We get a lot of people sort of writing in saying, oh, wouldn't you please talk about dealing with this? Wouldn't you please talk about dealing with that?
And you won't touch them because it's controversial and you're the only algorithm interaction is going to be because
it's controversial. It's more a case of I just don't have any knowledge expertise on that in it. Subject. Yeah. We often get people saying, "Oh, please do content on how to run games for kids."
Right.
I don't know how to run games for kids. I don't get exposed to a lot of kids.
Yeah, right.
It's just not the circle that I'm moving in. I'm like, no, go talk to Dead Ozzy Gamer.
Right,
he's all about.
Yeah, he's all about the kids.
Or disorders and things like that. I'm not a qualified clinician. I don't know.
Right.
I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Something that was quite nerve-wracking was there's a major computer game company that hires me every now and again to do like motivational group discussions with their employees. Usually it's always role-playing centric, but the first one that I did, there were like 350 employees that logged in because it counted towards their participation in extracurricular company activities.
Yeah, if I do this, I take a box.
Yeah, exactly. But the second time I did it, we had more people. So the organizer was like, they like you because more.
There's actually more people turned in this.
Anyway, so I'd worked with them for a couple of years, and then suddenly last year, I think it was, or the year before, they sent me a message and said, we'd like you to do a 1-hour presentation on LGBT, et cetera, in the community. Because you represent the community. And I was like, I'm not a very good representative of the community. It's not like I have flags and I'm not one of those vocal kind of people. Certainly I advocate for everyone as equal and, rights, et cetera. But also, who am I to talk on the state on
the behalf of
representation, on behalf of all these people? I can speak to one of those letters. The rest are as unusual to me as they are to anybody else. And I was under such pressure. I reached out to everybody, like everybody that I knew, that if they had a link somewhere, somehow to that space, so that I could be as representative as I could. And I did the lecture, and then they said, okay, now you have to do it to our Eastern office as well. So to Asia Pacific region.
Right.
And I went, okay, well, Australians and New Zealanders, that's fine. I can talk to them. But the whole of China and that area, that's quite a different sort of subject. It was a very different kind of conversation. Still interesting, but just so much pressure. I'm like, okay, I can't talk about these serious subjects. It requires me to do work and to talk about stuff. I have to go and interview other people. It was lovely to do it, and it was fascinating. But still, it was kind of like this is actually a serious subject that has serious ramifications, but in our crazy world of role playing. And then you start to realize that as much as we talk about it as being make believe, and I want a goblin forest over there, and I wanted this and that and the next thing. There is actually underneath that a very serious space, which a lot of people don't recognize. And certainly we see that on our YouTube channel. When I touch on slightly more in-depth topics, a lot of people go, oh, it has no space in role-playing.
Yeah, I hate that.
I'm like, I think it does.
I hate that.
Look deep enough.
One of the best things is I recently got the chance to play Vampire the Masquerade for the first time, and I was reading the book for that, and the content warning, trigger warning thing at the start of that book is fantastic, because it basically says, like, this setting deals with and it lists all of the things that you'd put on a consent form and be like, oh, this has no place in, and it says this content deals with this because it's important to have the option to deal with that stuff. But then it ends with one of the best sentences. It says, "This is a game about monsters. Don't use it as an excuse to be a monster." Like, you don't use this just because the content warning says it deals with molestation and stuff in this setting doesn't give you the right to be like, well, then I can do whatever I want in this game. Exactly. Like, you still need to have the consent of everybody at the table to explore those topics. And I do have one of my own consenting gaming forms that I give out whenever I'm playing a game, especially with new folk, but then check in with them every so often as well to see if anything's changed. And on there are all sorts of serious topics. And if everybody at the table has given me like an A, meaning in my form it's like saying I'm okay with the inclusion of this in any form, then quite often my home games especially, will introduce topics of like sexual assault or racism and things like that, never glorifying it, but always using it as a way of like, let's explore what it means to be in a fantasy world and how that affects, like how those have an ongoing effect into the role playing, and how that changes the town once this happens, or once this band of orcs comes rampaging and pillaging through the town, and what happens in the aftermath of that. Not just in the combat section where you kill all the orcs, yeah, that's fine, but then what happens after that? Or what happens if you chose to go somewhere else and then you come back to the aftermath and go, oh god, we weren't here for the orcs because we went off and did something stupid instead. So like, I will include that sort of role playing, but only if it is stated ahead of time that everybody is okay with us exploring those topics. The other thing as well is that I try back to what you were saying about the sort of diversity and being inclusive and things, and being asked to be a representation of that. I try my best to include all walks of life as NPCs in my game. I have an NPC character creator table that I made for myself, where I'll just roll to see if there's no reason for a particular NPC to be a particular gender or race or sexuality or whatever, I will roll just randomly, just so that I can make sure that I'm getting the inclusion of those different races and genders and things. But boy, did it bring out the bigots in the latest Viva la Dirt League episode in the comments, because I happened to mention one of the NPCs uses they them pronouns, and then in the same episode I happened to mention that one of the NPCs had two fathers, and it was strange because it was one of the NPCs who's been in the series from the beginning, like 3 years ago, and it's never come up before that she has two fathers, because why? It just didn't ever come up. And then this episode it happened to come up in conversation naturally, and everybody's like, oh, GM's gone woke, it's ruined the series and this and that and the other. And it was amazing for me to go, wow, I'm now thrust into this position of being like the representation of a community that I don't consider myself a part of, but like, just because I happened to want to be inclusive of them, I've now become this like diversity representation for it. And it was a very bizarre position to be put in.
It's a sad position to be put in. I dyed my hair blue for a whole bunch of reasons, none of which was because I consider myself a woke person. But my first video that I released with blue hair, I had people going, oh, you've gone woke. Now you're going to go broke. Unsubscribed. Goodbye. I was like, because my hair's blue, you're not going to listen to my content, which you've been listening to for years.
You have no value to me anymore. Your opinion, your opinions and everything has no value.
Exactly.
There's nothing I can gain from what you have to say.
Correct.
Because of
clearly
what you've chosen to
was drivel.
Look like now.
Yes, exactly. And you know, at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that sits underneath that, but it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. And I look at my own games, I'm like, well, do I include all of these different people? Do I try and do this? Yes, I do. I've personally seen how it's affected players at my table in positive ways.
Yeah.
So I will continue to do it. But if you've never seen that happen, and now you're being told you have to do it, or not you have to, and this is the thing that really gets me, is that people who usually have grudges, who are the ones that will make those kind of comments of, oh, you've gone woke, you're ruining the stream. You're going, I'm sorry, did anyone say you now have to do this?
you know, also have to dye your hair blue.
You have to now have two gay dads, you know, or you have to have two lesbians, or you have to have this, or you have to have that. No one said that. And on my own channel, where I am talking about methods that I use to improve games, I never say, and if you do not do this, you are a bad GM. I'm like, be inclusive if that's what your group is.
Yeah.
If your group is not, if you are a bunch of Nazis sitting around the table, being
Playing-
inclusive
playing
is probably
D&D.
going to make your group very unhappy. So don't do it. Just be a bunch of Nazis. Not that I am advocating or heroizing
It does bring
Nazis. I'm
to
just
mind
giving an
a
example.
hilarious mental image though of a bunch of skinhead neo Nazis playing D&D, like all being
Yes,
like fantasy
exactly.
races, and somehow being okay with everybody being like a different race at the table. I feel like there's a
I
skit in
mean,
there.
yeah, I was at a convention in Finland, and it was a glorious convention. It was wonderful. It was just a whole bunch of Finns who got together. They were celebrating geekness. So there was cosplay going on. There was role playing. There was LARPing. It was just fun,
Yeah.
absolute fun. And typical Finns, when I arrived, they're like, "We have two chaperones for you. They're both gay because you're gay." I went, okay, great. I think. I don't
I don't know
know.
what to read into
And
that. Like chaperones, as in just a chaperone, or they were trying to
well,
like
so,
set you
no.
up.
So what? Well, I don't know. No, the what they had done was it was the best convention I have ever been a guest at,
Yeah,
ever.
that's nice.
Because they put us up at this amazing hotel. There were two of us, myself and then Anthea Cole, who's an amazing cosplayer. And she had two chaperones as well, who were not gay, because she is not gay. Anyway, so they put us up at this hotel, and basically the chaperones were on 24-hour support duty. So if we needed something, we had their contact numbers and we would send them a text and they would be there and they would solve the problem, right?
Wow.
I don't know if I suspect they were just being overly cautious and overly protective of their guests. Because at one point, Anthony and I had to lie to our chaperones to get them to go home. Because we're like, we're just going to sit in the hotel. They're like, okay, we'll sit in the waiting room downstairs. We're like, but we might just be a couple hours. I was going to go and have a nap, and I think Anthea wanted to talk to her friends back in the States. Just go away,
Yeah,
because we
leave
feel
us
bad
alone.
that you are looking after us so well.
Yeah.
What amazing people. I'm still friends with those chaperones on Facebook, by the way.
Awesome.
Anyway, so the chaperone and I went out into this field that was right next to the convention, where all the convention attendees were. And I looked across the road and I was like, oh, cool. Are those guys cyberpunk? I don't know. They were all dressed in black. They didn't have any hair on their heads. They were wearing dark glasses.
Oh.
And he went, oh, no, those aren't cosplayers. Those are the neo-Nazis of the new wave who are trying to control Finland. They're just
wow.
making their presence known. I was like,
Oh shit.
to whom? Who cares? No, they're just there letting us know that they disapprove. And I was like, oh, okay. Every country has its problems. It was surreal. It was surreal. But the convention happened. Everyone was happy. There was no interference, which if you're going to protest, that's the best way to do it.
Yep.
Protest. Go ahead. Make yourself heard, but just don't interfere.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Damn, that's a story and a half. I love that. Just I do want to talk about a lot more about conventions because I know you go to a lot of them, and I'm going to be starting to go to a lot more of them myself as well. But before we get onto that, I want to talk more about the YouTube content and creating for us a place now where it's no longer a smaller niche that like when you got into it, and now as we were talking about with the pandemic and whatnot, a lot more channels arrived, and some of them stuck around after the pandemic and thrived and such. Is it harder these days to come up with content that hasn't been done elsewhere, or do you try and actively avoid other people's content so that you can't be accused of plagiarism, or how do you handle the market being flooded with so much D&D and RPG related stuff?
It's difficult, and to be perfectly honest with you, the experience that I've had in dealing with YouTubers who've been around for a long time or who have massive followings, we don't really watch what other people are doing.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly humbling when you go to an event where there are these YouTubers and you're wandering around and you're like, I have the third biggest number of subscribers and viewers in this group, and people walk up to you and go, "Oh, hello, what do you do? Who are you?" And you're like, "What do you mean? Who am I? I am an imposter, and you've seen through me, and so." So, and the reason for it is not ignorance. It's just a case of I don't watch other people's YouTube channels. Because generally speaking, they're usually advice on building the perfect character or the perfect monster encounter, or they're stats based. Or because it's like, well, unless it's a topic that's really interesting, I just don't have the time. To be perfectly honest with you, I was chatting with
a fact of it, unfortunately. Like I mentioned at the start, I watched your stuff back when I was getting into D&D. I got into it around the start of 5th edition. So I've been doing D&D about 8 years. And I was watching your stuff. I was watching a bunch of other people's stuff. And then since I started actually making it a career and following it and making my own content and things, I like before this interview, I was like, I should go check his channel out to see if the content has changed dramatically in the years that I've not actually seen stuff. Like you just unfortunately don't have the time. I used to absolutely adore Critical Role. I have barely seen any of the latest campaign, because who the hell's got time for 3 or 4 hours every week to keep up with an actual play?
Well, that's the other factor, is that you go, okay, cool. I'm going to support my friends, so I'm going to go and watch Nerdarchy stuff.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go and watch D, and then I'm going to go and watch Dag, and then I'm going to go and watch so-and-so, and I'm going to oh my god, I've spent my whole life watching everybody else.
Everybody else, Yes.
And
now I can't, and now I feel like I can't do anything because somebody kind of half touched on an idea that I want to do over here, and the same idea was kind of half touched on of them. And yes, I had my own take on it, because that's actually another thing. In the time that I've been doing things, people have been coming to me and been like, "Do you have any videos on how to make a D&D character, or how to do this and that?" And I'm like, "Nah, there's enough of that online." And people, I've realized over the years, they want me to do it because they want they don't watch those other people, they watch me. But I look at the internet and go, "But there's all these other people. I could list 20 different people that I watch that make amazing content, and the content's out there. Go watch them." But it's hard for me to remember no, you need to do your own take on it, because people want to watch. They want to watch it for you, not for the content you make.
Correct. No, absolutely. So there are times though when, with the D&D OGL crises.
Oh yeah.
Where I was like, okay, let me watch what other people are doing to see where their mentality is. To see where things are, and to try and get the perspective from other people. That was useful insofar as me going, oh, okay, I understand what's happening. Right. What was the other sort of topic that come up? There was something else that sort of washed through a couple of years ago, and I was like, all right, let's have a look at other people's channels and see their perspectives. Useful to watch the people, to see sort of what the zeitgeist is, I guess, of the what are other people actually feel us out. What is the community saying about this at the moment? And hopefully that doesn't turn into just like an echo chamber of everybody saying, oh well, this person's saying that. It actually all just comes back to one person's very vocal opinion. Correct. And that's exactly what happened with the OGL. Was that everybody was saying the same thing. And I got criticized for not saying anything. So then when I released my video, I got criticized for saying what I truly felt, which was not what everybody else was feeling. I was like, guys, I don't get it. You want me to, I'm not just going to parrot what everybody else is saying.
People would come into me for a lot as well, and my take was, I don't have a take on this. It's not a thing it's not a thing that's going to affect me directly. Obviously, I'm going to stand with third-party publishers if this is an issue that affects them, but it's not going to happen. You can see the outrage. It's clearly not going to happen. Everybody's like, oh, but what if it does? And I'm like, it's not gonna. And then sure enough, cut to a month later, and they've rolled it back, and I'm like, it was obvious from the start. I didn't have a take on it. Don't come to me for some sound bite, some controversial sound, new, or even just the same thing that everybody else is saying. You already know what you want to hear from me. Now pretend that you're hearing it in my voice. Satiate yourself.
Exactly.
So conventions have been a big thing for you the whole time that you've been making stuff, even before.
Uh, yeah, well, I mean, the convention kicked off the whole channel in the first place.
Yeah, you
So
you
yeah,
just
that
went
was.
as an attendee at first, like you just enjoyed
Yeah,
conventions.
absolutely. I think back to those days where I'm like, I remember what it was like going to a convention where I didn't have to do anything except wander around, get bored, eat bad food, buy some games, and go home. I'm
Yeah.
like, I miss those days. Those days. There was a certain innocence to them, you
I
know.
I chose
Um,
to do that for Auckland's got a real small one called Armageddon, and last year was my first year going to any sort of a nerd convention because I didn't really know that I
yes.
was a nerd until I started this sort of this content creation kind of stuff. And then the pandemic hit and there was no conventions. So my first chance was last year, and I went and
Yeah.
I knew I was going to PAX Australia, and everybody had told me PAX is huge. Auckland Armageddon is
Yes.
like, don't do them in the wrong order. You'll have the wrong
Correct.
impression.
Correct.
So I decided like I'm just gonna go to Armageddon and just be a guest, just to
Mm,
enjoy a convention for what it is.
mm,
And I'm glad I did because then I went to PAX Australia and I got to enjoy it in both capacities as like somebody on a panel and
right.
also just enjoying it on
Yes.
some of the days.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, the Finnish convention that I went to in Tampere was the best convention I have ever been to as a guest. They pampered us way more than they should have. But also, it was lovely going to because I gave two talks, and both of them, the attendance was just phenomenal. And this was pre-COVID. This was 2019, 2018. Um, because the Finnish were just so hungry for it. And that for me is the real joy of conventions is not what's happening at the convention. Because if you go to a convention, 90% of the stuff is exactly the same, whether you are at a convention in South Africa, in Japan, in Finland, or in the States, or in the UK, it doesn't matter where you are. It's all the same stuff, right?
Yeah.
D&D or role-playing, board games, miniatures, cool stuff. And then there's the one or two stalls that make it truly unique. For me, it's more about speaking to the locals
Mm-hmm.
and learning the local sort of take on things and the local flavors
Right.
and things, and that certainly is the joy that I have, and it's one of the major benefits of being on a panel or having a stand there, is that people come up to voluntarily give you that information.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Gotcha.
Um, and you go, okay, yes. At UK Games Expo, someone sent me an email saying, "Oh, it was so kind of you to give me half an hour to listen to my stories and stuff." I'm like, no, no, no. It was kind of you to give
Kind of you
me
to give
half
me
an
those
hour of your
stories.
time so that I could listen to your stories and take them and add them and think
Yeah.
about them and see a different perspective. Um,
And
so
what is a rough ballpark of how many conventions you'll go to in a year?
generally, this is, so excluding online stuff,
Yeah.
because online stuff I do as and when it crops up, but after pandemic now,
Mm.
we've been doing 3 a year, all local to the UK,
Right.
just because we're based in the UK, so we're trying to do that. Next year is a change, though.
Mm-hmm.
Next year we're going back to the States.
Going to Gen Con and
Or
things like that.
yeah, yeah. We have seen enough of a support base here in the UK to say, you know what, it's worth going to the States. It's worth going
Right.
to Gen Con.
And
Because
what do you sort of value that worth on? Like when you're deciding which
well,
conventions to go to and whatnot. What you're looking to
certainly
get
my
out of them.
business partner looks at making his money
Numbers.
back. Yeah, that's his job though,
Yeah.
and that's how he's kept us
Yeah.
afloat and has kept salaries being paid and that sort of thing. So, and I always respect that. Occasionally I'll go, no, I think I really need to go to this convention,
Hmm.
and he'll go, yeah, all right, fine. To be honest with you, the biggest thing that we look at is there an opportunity to engage with people? So, are there seminars that we can give? I love giving seminars. It just kind of reminds me of my lecture days,
Yeah.
and I really enjoy that. So, there was a convention that was like, "Hey, come along and just hang out." And I'm like, "Well, how would I engage with people?"
Hmm.
Just to hang out. I'm like, no, that doesn't really work for me in terms of what I'm looking for as a
Hmm.
person,
Yeah.
to be honest. Um, so we look at something like Gen Con. I did Gen Con in 2019, and the talks we gave, again, just packed full of people, hungry, 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 with so many great questions and stuff. It's like, okay, good. This is somewhere where it's useful. Whereas, for example, Tokyo Convention, gaming convention, they didn't do any talks. It's lucky because I don't speak Japanese, so it would have been a very short talk. But, if they invited me back, it'd be
Could have talked
okay,
as long as you wanted. It wouldn't have had a lot of engagement.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. So,
I could certainly fill out a 2-hour talk in Tokyo. I'm not sure that anybody would understand me, but I just like the sound of my own voice.
Exactly. Politely wait for you to finish and then all clap and then leave. So I think that's the one thing that I look for, and the other thing that I look for is I chat to friends of mine who go to conventions on a regular basis, and you say, okay, which are the conventions that are worth going to, which are the ones that are interesting, which are the ones that are slightly different. So like PAX in the US gets a lot of attention. People are like, oh, it's so much fun going there, and that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, there are ones here in the UK that you just can't not go to. And for us, it's also, yes, it's about meeting people, it's about learning stories, but it's then also about connecting with creators, and companies that will publish or print or do this or do that or the next thing. The irony was that at UK Games Expo, we were all so busy because it's been the busiest UK Games Expo in their history, that the 3 people that I was supposed to meet, we actually never got to meeting over a 3-day convention because we couldn't leave our stall because it was so busy.
It was so busy.
And yeah, it was nuts. But usually that's what you do as well. Is you go, okay, cool. On the Sunday, it's usually quite quiet. So then you mingle and you network and you chat and that sort of thing. So yeah.
So tell me about the books. When you're at the convention at your stall, it's often for selling books and promoting the channel and things. But what books are? Talk me through your books first. Which ones have you made and which ones are in production?
So the big one, which a lot of people will know of if they know anything about my channel, is the Practical Guide to Becoming a Great GM. And that's huge. It's like 300 and something pages long. It's a big book. And that we released 2 years ago, and the title's long. And people go, well, why is it such a long title? I'm like, well, because the title tells you exactly what is in the book. It is a practical guide.
It's like those old medieval manuscripts that were like the title was the entire front page. It was like a chapter for the title.
Correct.
A treatise on the introductions of so and so and how long they've been in the country. And the effect that they've had on the local ecosystem, including badgers, and you're like, I know exactly what I'm about to read. There's no surprises.
There's no surprise. Yes. So yeah, Practical Guide. We call it Practical Guide for short. It was written so that as you are going through the book, there is a workbook that comes with it, and if you fill in the workbook, by the time you get to the end of the book, your campaign and your world that you've created is ready to run. You can literally close the book, and start running your game straight away.
Yeah.
So that you don't read the book and go, those are some cool ideas. Now let me start working. Oh, wait, what was that one idea? What was that idea? What was
gotcha.
I hate that. So it was like, no. You've got to be able to do it as you were going along.
Yeah.
And that approach.
Instant right there is the problem I found with the Dungeon Master's Guide, is that when I started getting into D&D and I was like heroin in my veins and I need more of everything, and I was like jumped in for both feet first, I ended up reading the monster manual as if it was a book cover to cover and like list every single monster in there. I read the player's handbook cover to cover. I started reading the Dungeon Master's Guide. I got so inspired by like certain things that I was like, I'm gonna go do this, and I'm gonna do some world building, and I'd be doing some world building, and I'd be like, and where did I get to in the dungeon? I have no idea. I don't know where. It wasn't like a working along with it.
Correct. And also I think that as much as the Dungeon Master's Guide has got some great stuff in there, I think there's a lot of stuff in there that's missing as well.
Yeah.
that you kind of go, don't you feel like this should be in there? And
Yeah, the number of times I've
again,
flicked back and forth, it's not like great.
yeah,
It's not very well like arranged to remember
correct,
where everything is.
correct.
With the player's
Yeah,
handbook, I can be like, if I need to flick to a thing, I know roughly whereabouts it is. In the
right,
Dungeon Master's Guide, I'm like,
right.
I could be in any chapter, and then I
Yes,
eventually
exactly.
I spend ages looking, and then I'm like, oh, it's just because it's just not in here. They just never really put a
Yes,
paragraph in about
they just
that
didn't.
plane of existence or about this or that or the other.
Correct, correct. And again, that's what we did with Practical Guide. We spent a lot of time with the layout so that it's color coded. So you can see, oh, I need to. What was that thing about building my imagination? Oh, that's the red section. What was world building? That's the yellow section. What is NPCs and stuff? That's green. Okay, cool. If I'm looking for something, it's in there, or it's in there, or
Gotcha.
it's
Smart.
so. Yeah, so we did Practical Guide, and then the very first book that I wrote that I spoke about earlier, which was when I was in Tokyo, was the Guide to Epic Campaigns. Mainly because my personal style of GMing, I don't know how to do a non-epic campaign. My campaigns are always world building, world shattering in their scope and scale. My heroes are true heroes.
Yes.
I think it's just from watching too much He-Man and the Master of the Universe when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know, everything was life or death on a grand scale. It was no small sort of stuff.
Mine
So
mine
we
tends to be
rewrote.
mine tends to be like that in the end. Like I go, okay, every campaign is going to ultimately end with if these particular characters die, the world ends. Because they're the
Right.
only, because the way I come up with story is that I can't do anything until I've got the characters. The characters come to me. I like ask my players for what, like, a detailed backstory, come up with some NPCs that you know and stuff, and then I'll connect the dots between all of their backstories and go, oh, they've all got daddy problems for some reason. Okay, let's there's something in there. Okay, his dad ran away from home, so
Right.
he's going to be this character, and he's working for the big bad and blah blah. And then I come up with my story from that. And then if they ever die, the big bad evil plot goes ahead and the world ends.
Yes.
and so that does mean
Seems
that
fair.
because I run all of my games in the same setting, in the same world, there are like 12 different world ending things happening at any one time, and there's different parties dealing with every different one of them. But they always start off at like level 1 or whatever, not knowing
Right.
that they are that important. They're doing things like
No.
killing the rats and stuff, but they're always
Yeah,
tied
yeah, yeah,
to the
exactly,
main plot in some way.
Correct. Yeah, the journey starts somewhere. So yeah, so we did
Guide to epic
we did a rewrite.
campaigns. So
Yeah.
so how long
Yes.
were you writing that for? How long was it, like,
Complete guide.
in your head before you
Oh
actually
no,
put it on
I'm
paper
not.
and got it out?
I'm one of those infuriating people where I go, this is a cool idea for a book, and then I
And
will
oh, look, I'm
write.
writing it.
Yes, I very seldom will plan.
Right.
I'm not a huge planner. I mean, my whole channel's focus is now on not planning your campaign. Even though it's a book on how to plan your campaign. Most of the secret of the book is
Do as
to
I
don't.
say, not what I do.
So in fairness, though, Epic Campaigns and Practical Guide are the videos transcribed and cataloged into a working sequence of education and development. So
Right.
technically, I've been planning both of those books for years and
Yeah.
years as I've done each video and explored concepts and that sort of thing. But that's the joy of writing about something that you are so invested in, is it's easy to write because you know this stuff already because you've been doing it for
Yeah.
so long. Things that took a little bit longer was once we said, okay, we've got those two books going. People are loving those books. What else can we do? I had just started a new relationship, and my fiance, now fiance, at the time, I said, okay, well, let's do some role playing, some Dungeons and Dragons, because he'd role played in the past. And he's like, oh yeah, but there's so much rules. Isn't there a simple role playing system? I'm like, well, there are. And he's like, I want a role playing system that's just yes and no. I'm like, that doesn't exist, and I don't think it could exist. Anyway, it now does because I wrote it, realizing that there are ways in which it could work. I was like, oh, actually, you know what? So it's a love letter basically to my fiance going, well, here's a role playing system
Oh wow.
that is basically a yes or no. And that was
that's a new
lovely
level
to
of
see.
commitment. You're making the rest of us look bad in our in our romantic gifts to our partners. I wrote you a
Yeah,
TTRPG because
I
one
wrote
didn't
you a
exist.
TTRPG. Yeah. Well, in truth, he kickstarted it because on our first date, he had created a whole bunch of random number generated tables for what could or could not happen.
On the date.
Like silly, fun things.
That's cute.
We
Oh,
never
that's
rolled on the
adorable. I
table though.
love
We kind of forgot, just because we hit it off so well.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah,
brilliant.
so Bounty
That in
Hunter.
itself is like, hey, green flag, green
Yes,
flag.
exactly,
Just
right?
the existence of
Exactly. I
the
was like,
tables. You don't actually have to roll on them.
that's my level of nerd, and the fact that we didn't have to. Yeah. So Bounty Hunter was really successful from that perspective. It's Dice's role playing system, very simple, very quick, very fast. People really took to it as well. I didn't realize just how big a community there is of people who want to role play but without dice,
Yeah,
or
right.
without Jenga towers or
Yeah,
playing
yeah, yeah,
cards. Sorry, Michael.
yeah.
They just want to basically do the role playing side of
Yeah.
things. The Bounty Hunter came out. It was really much more successful than we thought. I'm just looking at the last few physical copies we have left of it. And we're like, okay, right, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? What's
Yeah, right,
next?
right, right.
And my layout designer, who was a fan of the channel, and that's how he became my layout designer, he wrote to me going, I see you writing a new book. You did the layout for your first book. It was shit. Can we do a new one? And I'll do it for you. And I went, all right, you're hired, Martin. I don't know your credentials, but if you can do a better job, that's great. And
You're a
now
layout
he's the
designer.
layout
That's
designer of the
credentials enough.
yeah, well, exactly. You seem to think, put your money where your money where your
Yeah,
mouth
yeah, yeah.
is, and let's see what happens. And he's now one of the lead creatives for Ghostfire, who produced
Oh
just
wow.
so many books, and
Yeah, they
and
do.
that's because they saw the book that he made for me.
Oh wow.
And you
That's
go, well,
brilliant.
that's a beautiful journey for him. It's
Yeah.
great for me as well because obviously his skills have improved. So he did the layout, and it looked phenomenal. We're like, okay, good, great. So he's done all of my books. Um, and he came to me and he said, look, I've got an idea for a book. It's a map book, which folds out and then folds back again. And
Because everybody
I went,
remembers
okay.
how easy it is to fold map books when you from back before GPS.
Wow. Right. Yes. Well, those were complicated, massive concertina things. This one
I just
is
got that.
very
Yeah, I
straightforward.
just got the image of somebody like trying to DM, but they've got one of those
Yes.
atlases, and they're like, "I think we're taking the wrong road."
Exactly. So yeah, so we did that one, and that was really cool. Just 30 battle maps that you need on a daily basis as a GM.
Brilliant.
And then the last one now is the Kickstarter is over, and that is creating epic locations. And it's a collaboration with another company that I work with and have worked with for years, Dungeon Fog. They do map making software.
Yeah,
And their CEO reached out to me and he's like, hey, I know you're writing a whole bunch of books, but let's write another one. And I went, okay, sure, why not? I mean, this sounds fun.
sounds like me.
And so that's a book that hopefully, if you are a GM who does not get to travel the world very much, or does not get to travel your country very much, if your country is a very boring geographical country,
Yeah.
then hopefully this book will help. Because the idea is that you go, okay, my characters are journeying into the plains, grassland plains. How do I make this interesting?
Yeah.
What the hell happens in grassland plains? You will turn to the section of our book called Grassland Plains, or just Plains.
Yeah.
And there are a whole bunch of not monster encounter tables, because you can get those anywhere.
Yeah.
These are ideas for descriptive words that you can use, rather than saying it's great big open rolling grassland plains.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the sum totality of one's description of the space. It's like, okay, well, there's that. Did you know there are different types of plains? What's the difference between a savanna and a prairie, for example? And how does that make it more interesting or less interesting? And what are the complications that can be added? Then there's a section, if you have time to prepare, which inspires you in terms of, okay, well, think about fantasy planes rather than just regular planes. or what is a grassland plain in hell like? And why
Right.
is
Yeah.
that different from a grassland plain in the Feywild or in
Yeah.
the
Gotcha.
Shadow Realm? Or, so it's just this giant book of improving your own creative space within the 15 normal geographical
Hmm.
locations that our player characters usually find themselves in. So that's probably been the most research I've done for a book in terms of I have never been to the Arctic and
Yeah. Right.
climbed
Right.
on a glacier.
Yeah.
I need to understand this more. And
Yeah.
one of the things that we did was we said, okay, we're not going to read a book and take that information. We are going to speak to people. So I got hold
Right.
of friends. I'm like, hey, you live near a glacier, right? Just go touch it and tell me what it tastes like. Because I need to know. I need to know. I need to do this. I need to do that.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine, she's now living in Finland. And I know
All roads lead to
she's been
Finland.
well, all roads lead to Finland. Yeah, she's a deep sea diver, and I said to her, "Okay, I'm doing underwater. Talk to me. Let's
Right.
unpack
Nice.
these things." So it's been a
Hey, it's
lot
good
of
to have a
fun.
connection. Good to have connections.
Um,
Now, which of my
yes,
friends has been
yes,
in a volcano?
correct, correct. And
Yeah.
surprisingly, there are fans who live in Hawaii who have been near
Yeah. Yeah.
volcanoes
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
can tell me, "Oh, actually, this happens or that happens or whatever." You're like, "Okay, good, great. Thank you for the information." So
Brilliant.
yeah, that's going into layout design hopefully soon, and then it all goes off to publishing and printing.
What
Um,
what does the sort of day in the life of look like when you are in the midst of writing one of those things? Is it, do you have like a work schedule for yourself? Like I get up at 9 and I do
yeah,
this and I do this and I write for this long. Is it just a regimen or?
yes. So it's definitely there's a process that I have, and usually it's along the lines of I'm an early morning person,
Hmm.
so I will start work 7:30, 7 o'clock. This morning I started at 6:50. Um,
Ooh-wee.
get the admin out the way.
Yeah.
So if there's emails and that kind of rubbish, and then I'll go, right, I'm writing this section or that section. My personal goal is to hit somewhere between 2.5 to 3,500 words in a writing day.
Right.
Um, that's just something that I've had as, I mean, I used to be a script writer a long time ago, and it's just sort of my comfortable pace.
Hmm.
And it doesn't really matter what I'm writing because usually I'm writing about what I know.
Yeah.
That's what I will do. So, like with epic locations, it would take me the whole day because you'd be like, okay, well, what the hell is a prairie, and why is a
Yeah.
prairie different from a savanna?
Yeah.
So you're googling and you're deep diving, and you're like, okay, I need to get hold of my friends in the Midwest who live out in prairies. Again, can you just go lick and tell me what it tastes like? Because I have the section on taste. What is what?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that took a long time, but usually my goal is I will go, okay, I'm going to write 3,500 words. I'm going to get this block of text out, and then that's it. I don't do anything else.
Right.
I'll go, right, I could do that in 2 hours. Great.
Hmm.
I'm going to go play computer games.
Right.
Um, Generally speaking, I will then pick up again at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon
Mm.
and spend 3 hours doing the graphics because I do all of the artwork for my books as well.
Right.
And I'll go, okay, cool. Well, let's do some artwork. Let's prep some artwork.
Yeah.
Because I have two giant computers, and the one is just for rendering art. So I'll
Right.
prep that stuff. The next morning, I'll set that to render because the render will take 6 hours,
Gotcha.
and then I'll do my writing, and then that's it.
Yeah.
I generally will find that after 12 noon in the afternoon
Hmm.
until about 4, I'm a waste of time. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work. And I I spoke to my old boss from the TV company, and she's like, "Yeah, yeah, we know. You'd go
That
for
tracks.
lunch, and when you'd come back, you'd sit in front of your computer and pretend to work until about 3:30, and then you'd start to perk up again, and that's when we would then come in and ask you questions and stuff." She said, "But we knew." So
Good to
yeah.
know. Good to know those things
Um,
about yourselves.
I think, we did a thing, and I preach about these all the time, called Enneagrams,
Mm.
which is a series of numbers 1 to 9. And it gives you in broad strokes, your kind of work ethic.
Right.
And it gives you the strengths and it gives you the weaknesses. And we did this as a company. And it was amazing once we reshuffled everybody according to their numbers, how much more productive we became.
Right.
And my business partnership, which we've been going on for years now, is a success because of the two numbers that my business partner is and that I am. And I'm a number 7, and 7s are dreamers. We come up with 1,000 ideas in 10 seconds. That's what we do. We just spew out stuff. Sometimes it's good, most of the time it's rubbish. But there's just so much of it that eventually something is worthwhile.
Wait,
right?
go back a
Yes,
couple.
yes. Go back 15 steps, right? Yes.
This one.
That one. Let's do that one. I am awful at finishing those ideas, though. So I'll start writing a book.
Yeah.
And then I'll get distracted because I know how the book ends.
Yeah,
I just haven't finished writing the ending yet. So I'm done with the book.
Yeah.
Whereas my business partner is all about dotting I's and crossing T's.
Right.
So he brings me back going, before you start your next project, finish this first one, and then you'll get a reward. And it's usually like a little mini or it's this or that. He knows how to handle me very well. But at the same time, I also know, yes, exactly, right? I also know how to handle him because his weakness as a number 1 is that he sometimes will get bogged down in getting the perfect solution. And he never actually gets a solution because he's trying to find the perfect solution.
Perfect.
So he never resolves things. And so I can come in and go, it's done. I'm telling you it's done. Move on. We're going on to the next big idea. So it's a complementary sort of thing like that. So yeah, that my routine is based specifically around knowing my strengths and weaknesses on that front.
Brilliant.
And not fighting against them, not going, I'm a terrible human because I only work for 4 hours in the morning and no.
Yeah. Know what you can do
I
and
will
work
produce
to. Makes sense.
what needs to be done. Yeah.
I want to open it up to chat questions rather. So I've been seeing some D&D questions coming in from the chat for a bit, but don't forget to redeem your channel points if you've got a question for me or Guy. Obviously, I'm talking to the Twitch chat right now. If you're listening later on YouTube or on a podcast, it's going to be harder. You're going to have to yell a lot louder for us to hear the question. But I believe in you. I believe you can do it. So make sure to get those questions in. Before we get into that, I just want to talk one more thing about accents and voices. Because you mentioned South Africa a few times. You were born and raised there?
Yes, sir.
And yet you have this very well-spoken English, kind of a typically British accent. Is this because of how you're raised, or you've specifically adapted your voice so that you can blend into the Brits?
It certainly depends on what country I'm living in and who and what I'm trying to achieve. Yes. So the area I grew up in is a very British English area of South Africa. Bearing in mind, South Africa has 9 official languages.
Yeah.
So there are 9 regions.
You'd expect nothing less. You'd expect nothing less from a country that has 3 capital cities or something like that, right?
Yes. We like our cities. 3 capital cities. We only have 4 in total, so it's kind of like, anyway.
It's just at that point, it's just a shun of that 4th one.
It's pretty much, yeah. So I grew up in an area where the accent was quite colonial, as someone who was living in the UK would call us. It's very colonial, South African. And certainly when you think of South African accents, you think of accents that the Americans put on, which is very heavy South African rolling of R's.
The South African accent.
Ma and Pa, and we're going to go and be mercenaries in Africa, eh? So, yes. And funnily enough, the more British your accent, the more people are likely to do what you ask them to do.
Right.
I think it's a legacy from Empire days.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds very much like do what you ask us to do, or we will take something that belongs to you, or we will kidnap you, or we will steal your things.
I'll never forget my boss once. He said, "I'm going to show you the power that accent has," and I was like, "Okay." So he walked into a bank, and he was a wonderful Zulu man. Walks into the bank, and he tries to deposit some money into his daughter's bank account, but he doesn't have her bank account number, just her
Right.
name and some other details. And the cashier went, "No, I'm sorry, you can't do that." He came out, he gave me the exact same slip, and he said, "Right, you go in and deposit this money into my daughter's bank account." And I said, "It's never going to work. Come
I
on."
don't have
He's like,
the
"Go."
account
So
number.
I
Just do
walked
it,
in and I
Britman.
went, "Exactly." And I went, "Look, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm afraid I don't have the account number of this friend of mine, and I'm in an awful hurry. Is there something that we can do?" And sure as nuts, this bloody cashier went, "Oh, okay, let me take their name. You've got this detail, you've got that detail. All right, I'll fill it in for you." And I walked out and I went, "All right, fine. I accept."
I get you. Okay.
But it is funny though, because you when I moved to the UK, a lot of people kind of look at me, and you can see them listening,
They're like,
and then after a while they'll
this
go,
guy's an imposter. He's a
you're
foreigner.
not from the UK. Yes, you're a filthy foreigner. What the hell are you doing in our country?" And I sort of go, "Yes, yes, yes. I'm from here, and this and the next thing." But a friend of mine, he and I grew up doing accents with each other. We were at school throughout, and absolutely adored playing all of these different accents.
Yeah.
And we would do it just in school. We'd get up and dare each other. "Okay, do your entire English oral presentation on whatever as a Scotsman
Yeah.
or as an Irishman." And
Yeah,
you'd
yeah,
try and
yeah.
sit there and listen to them. And you'd wait for them to fall over,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
not, as the case may be. So his favorite accent was Australian, and he now lives in Australia. So
it's
I
it's
wonder if
the,
that's
that's the
helping
only
him.
the only reason
It's great.
he just ended up getting
Yeah,
pulled into it. Um,
pulled into it.
but yeah, the reason I brought it up was you and I played together once in a game, probably a DAG game if I'm thinking right, and
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
remember really much about it. But you put on this French accent for it. I think it was a Through the Breach game, and you put on this French accent, and it was the best French accent I've seen a non-Frenchman do.
Oh, really? Good
Yeah,
heavens.
and I was like,
Well,
"Oh
I
wow,
do.
this is really," because it wasn't like put on with a trowel. It was like very
Right. It
realistic.
was not over the top.
Yeah, it was a very realistic kind of a muted, not drawing attention to it kind of a thing. But it was, but
Yes.
as I often talk about with accents, because I'm very good at them myself without blowing my own horn. That's
Yes.
one of my strengths. I think it's most important to go for consistency over like a particular vowel sound for a
Exactly.
particular thing, like because there are a million different people in name the city, and all of them have their own unique voice, and maybe one of them had an influence because their dad was from this other country, or they've spent
Right.
a
Exactly.
semester abroad in this other country studying blah blah blah, and so everybody's got little and so you can't look at, if it's a consistent voice, you can't look at it and go, "That's wrong, that's a wrong voice," because
Yes,
we don't
exactly.
roll our R's
You've
like
got
that.
it.
Because you can go to that country and be like, "That guy is from this country, born and raised, never set
Correct.
foot out of this country, and he does roll his R's like that." You can always
Correct.
point to somebody.
Correct.
So as long as you've got consistency, that's the key to having like a believable accent. And I was
also
really
think
blown
that-
away by yours and your consistency.
Well, thank you. I
in this
appreciate
French.
that.
And that's when because I
I
don't
was-
really see much of it in your videos and things, but I saw it when I was role playing with you, and I was like, "Oh, guy's really good at voices."
Accents are a bit tricky these days because people talk about, "Oh, you're appropriating cultures."
Right,
if you start
yes.
with accents. I personally, I agree with that if every single one of your villains is
Is a
German
particular
who is
yeah.
goose-stepping on doing all the evil things.
Mm-hmm.
But if one character has a German accent, you go, "Well, I'm using what I have heard in my own experience to give this dwarf a voice.
Yeah.
I am not mocking a
Yeah.
German speaker. I am not mocking the German people. I am not stealing from those people.
Yeah.
I am admiring that accent.
Mm-hmm.
I am drawing on that accent, and I'm not and as someone who is an entertainer, because I think once you step onto the platform of live broadcast or onto YouTube, you are an entertainer in some way. There is an advantage of going, "Okay, well, if I have this character have a German accent and they are evil, that is a trope.
Yeah.
How can I entrench that idea, or how can I subvert that idea and have the German person being the good guy?
Yeah.
And the French cook not being an insane cook, but being
Yeah,
a
yeah,
nice, normal, calm cook. Although I very seldom do that.
yeah.
So
The
yeah, but
and the
the
time that
idea
I've
is there, the
the
intention
time
is
I've run into that most was I used to do a stream on Twitch called just Charisma Check, where it was just a chatting stream where I'd just hang out with my chat, and they ask me questions. We'd talk about D&D tips and tricks, whatever. And on my channel, I would have a channel point redemption for accent, attempt an accent, and people would redeem that and say do a Swiss German one, and I'd be like, okay, let's first start with what I think it's going to be, and then I would open a website called the International Dialects of English Archive, which is a phenomenal resource because it is, as it sounds, an entire archive of just international dialects of English, and so you can go, okay, Europe, Switzerland, and then there's like 20 different Swiss options,
right.
and
Yes.
you can see before even clicking on them, like female, 44 years old, yada yada. Then you can click on it and it says like any time spent out of the country, or other influences on this person's dialect
Yes.
or whatever, and then they've got a recording where you can listen to them recording, and it's got transcript and you can hear it and you can practice it and stuff. And I would do that on my stream. If it was an accent I could do already, I'd just do it, but if it wasn't, I would practice it on stream, and it was a way of sort of broadening my accent work and my voice work.
Right.
But the times that it came up as like an issue was whenever somebody would redeem an accent that I wouldn't get cast as if I was being cast. So like a
Right.
lot of
Yes.
European, Western European particular accents, people didn't have a problem saying attempt a French accent,
Yes.
attempt a Swiss accent, attempt an Italian.
Yes. Yeah.
But when people said attempt a Korean accent or attempt a Japanese accent,
Yes.
and I would go about it the same way, like an academic
Sure.
approach,
Same
like open up,
methodology. Yeah.
open up the Japanese tab and be like, okay, let's listen to what vowel sounds are they doing, how tight is their jaw, where is the placement of the voice in the
Yes.
mouth, how tight is their tongue, are they rolling are they pursing their lips when they say this
Yeah.
letter. But as soon as I would go to open up the tab, people in the comments would be like, "Oh, maybe don't do that. Oh, maybe don't do a Japanese.
Yeah.
Don't go for the Japanese one because that's
Yeah.
appropriation, or that's verging
Yes.
on racism and things." And I'd be like,
Yes.
I'm approaching it in the same academic way as I would be approaching any other accent.
Correct.
Why is it more racist for me to say attempt I don't know, a Mexican accent than it would be for me to attempt a German accent? I've got as much Mexican lineage as I have German, but because I
Yes.
happen to be basically Aryan, like I'm a blonde-haired, pale-skinned, blue-eyed fella, and I
Yeah.
can pass as German, it's okay for me
It
to
is
attempt a
difficult.
German accent.
It really is difficult. And I think that there's a lot of things that are going on there. For me, the frustration is when people are jumping up and down on those kind of appropriation banners, you're like, but you're not from that culture yourself. When I was in Tokyo, my favorite thing was to try and get the Japanese accent. I can't because the Japanese accent, when speaking English, depends on which school they learned English at, because
Right,
they're
yes,
being taught
yeah.
English by foreigners.
That's
and
one of my
sometimes they're being
favourite things.
taught by Australians or Americans.
One of my absolute favourite things is hearing people who don't
Yeah.
speak English as a first language speaking English in a very strong Australian accent or a strong
Right?
American, like Texan accent or something, and being like, man, the guy who taught you English had a real accent on him.
Exactly. So the only Japanese accent that I could fall back on was the one that is perpetuated in animation shows.
Right, yeah.
And I would try to do it for my partner at the time, who was Japanese, and he'd laugh and he's like, but we don't sound like that when we speak English. I'm like, no, but that's because you spent 3 years in Australia learning to speak English, or you spent, this, that, next thing. But this is what we think, and that's because certain Japanese actors in the States ham up the Japanese accent,
yeah.
which is consumerable for the States. And you go, so guys, when you're accusing me of stealing someone's voice, I am effectively stealing a voice that an actor has already created for a performance. That's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
But I agree, it is a tricky area. And I know certainly the Swedish guys, when I play, I have some wonderful Swedish players. And I love a Swedish accent. It's so much fun to do. I learnt it by watching Norseman, which is a Viking comedy series that was made in
I
Sweden.
I've
Right?
been recommended that recently. Actually, I should check it out.
Yes, Norseman is a lot of fun if you like deadpan humor.
Yes, yeah.
Um, and and so I used Norseman as my basis. And so my Swedish players, they're like, please don't do the Norwegian Swedish accent. And I'm like, why? Why? And they're like, because you sound like our fathers and our politicians. And that's not what the youth sound like. I'm like, but you do sound exactly like that. I'm hearing it as you are telling me not to do it. So I'm afraid you're wrong. And it makes them laugh. So
the
that's the closest I've ever got to someone asking me not to do accents.
the Scandinavian accents are a sore spot for me because in those accent redemptions, they were the ones that the in jokes,
Yes.
the trolls would be like, do a Norwegian because they just know that I can't. They just know that and it doesn't matter how long I spent on the
Yeah,
international
yeah.
dialects listening. I was like, it's too close to English. They're so well spoken because
Yes.
everybody there is taught English from an early age.
Absolutely.
That the
Yeah,
accent
yeah.
is like you can hear it. You can hear that they're
Yes.
not an English native speaker, but I can't put my finger on the individual elements of it
Exactly
enough
right.
to
Yeah.
mimic it or to practice it. And so that was kind of the go-to troll Rob with an
Yes.
accent would be like Swedish or Norwegian or something. Anyway, we are fast running out of time, as always happens when I've got such a fantastic guest to chat with. So let me open up my requests queue and open up the D&D questions that have been coming in and see what people want answered. This can't be right. I've seen a bunch of D&D questions coming in, but I've only got 2 on here.
Yeah, I
for
didn't
some
think
reason.
there would be very many. People are like, oh, you're talking to that guy. Yeah, he doesn't know anything.
I can only see 2 in the
No
request queue, but I
questions.
can see more than that in my Twitch activity feed, so I'm not sure what's going on here. Anyway, I'll ask the ones that I can see. From Wraith, about an hour ago, what's been an absolute standout experience or moment in one of your games that you've enjoyed or still think about now? Or a really bad experience that you've learned from? Trying to sneak in 2 questions at once.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do both because the first one's quite quick. I had a player, wonderful player, and she found this dagger, which she discovered was a god-slaying dagger. It was a dagger that had been designed by another god to slay gods. And so she had this dagger. It was really cool. She used to use it in combat every now and again. And she was chasing this suspicious character who'd been following her for a while. Caught him, stabbed him to death with the dagger, and inadvertently killed the god of joy. And so the whole world turned black and white. Because that's what happens when you kill the god of joy.
Yeah.
Her fate, she was so, as the player, she was so depressed and disappointed with herself that she had killed him. Because I kept saying, do you do the killing blow? And she's like, yes, in this frenzy. And that the whole thing that was in black and white, she's like, I've broken the game. This is terrible. Anyway, that was great.
Did they have to go on like a
quest
quest to go and like try and resurrect him or to regain color, Pleasantville style?
It was one of those campaigns that was based around the players' characters, and the one player character was a paladin who had spoken to his god and discovered that his god was basically useless and a power-mongering sycophant. So he slowly started to manipulate the whole group to kill the gods, and eventually replaced all of them by becoming the one true god.
Oh wow!
Yeah, that was a fun campaign. It took a long time to play out, but once the god of joy went, the rest of the gods followed suit quite quickly because they started to band together to try and stop these people from taking over.
With like god level kind of interventions and god themed quests and things, how can you mirror that with saying, as you did earlier, like don't plan a campaign, essentially don't plan too much? Like
because I didn't know that they were going to kill the god of joy, so all that I do is I go, I am the god of war, and I have just watched my best friend Joy be stabbed to death by this little dwarf. What do I do?
Right.
Yes. So the first thing was that they got attacked by
so it's more about being
ancient warriors. It's reactive.
It's more about it's more about being so fleshed out in your world building that you can be reactive to things as the characters in that world would naturally be, like to sort of follow the story that comes.
You don't have to go to the whole world. It's more a
Hmm.
case of in that area. So
Yeah.
whenever my players do something, my go-to question is who's been affected by this and why.
Right.
So if the players rob a dungeon and the dungeon, there's something living in the dungeon, they are affected by the players coming in. What are they going to do about it? Are they going to fight back? Are they going to flee? Are they going to try and get help?
Hmm.
So my characters in my game space are all reacting. They've got plans of their own. They've got their own things that they're doing,
Hmm.
but that's being railroaded by the players just coming in and doing their random and wonderful stuff. And so to try and get them to stick to that original plan that they made is madness in my thinking.
Yeah.
Rather, it's much more organic to have them go, well, I had planned on invading next week, but the players have arrived at my camp a week early, and what am I going to do about that? They've ruined the catapults, they've done this, they've done that. Do I withdraw and come up with a battle plan? Do I hunt down the player characters? So it creates a much more dynamic environment, and then it allows me to role play as the god of war, going, okay, well, I raised 1,000 of my fallen warriors that were feasting with me in my great hall, and they got slaughtered. I need to go speak to the god of death, just temporarily
Just like, hey man,
suspend
can I have
the
some?
whole death thing.
Can I have a loner, please?
Exactly. So I'm having this role play.
You know when I did you that solid? I'm
Yes.
cashing in a
You
chip.
know all of those thousands of souls from that massacre? I feel like I just need those 4 people to die, and death is going, I'm impartial, I can't do this, this is
Yeah,
not
yeah.
on my purview. So then, so I'm exploring this solution as the gods or as the characters.
So then, if you're sort of reducing the amount of the way that you're prepping it, how far in
Yeah.
advance you're prepping or planning, I suppose.
Mm.
How are you dropping in sort of hints that will later kind of have satisfying payoffs as to what those gods or those NPCs or the big bad evil guy is doing? Like how do you sort of make it
Sure.
so that they can then look back and go, oh, this has been seeded since day one or whatever.
Yeah. I realize that the players are going to create that link anyway, regardless of how much effort I do. Right?
Right, you just have give a knowing wink and a smile, and they're like, oh, you had this whole thing planned out.
My favorite point in case was I was using my Epic Battle Maps book, and this is not to plug the book. I was using it at a convention game where these maps I made 2 years ago have had printed and were using because I couldn't be asked to draw on the map in the convention, right?
Right, yeah.
And the player characters walk up to a statue that is in the map. And they go, 1, 2, 3. There's 4 characters there. There's 4 of us. No, there's 5 of us. That means one of us dies. And you're like, huh? And the one player goes, well, if there's 4 characters, do the characters look like us? And I went, yes.
Yes.
That smelled like an amazing
yeah,
answer,
exactly, right? You look down at your note.
So
you're like,
my whole
scribble.
campaign
Yes,
just
it does.
suddenly shifted into a time traveling campaign. That the player characters
Wow.
they'd gone through a dimension door to a different part of the country. Well, now that dimension door just became a different part of the country and a different time. So they'd been kicked into the future.
Brilliant.
But they built that all on their own. I had nothing to do with that. From a pre-generated image, right?
Yeah, that's
Having said
actually
that,
it's funny because you mentioned Dungeon Fog earlier. I was in a game on Winter's Tales, an Australian D&D company, and I was a guest star in that one. And on the Dungeon Fog map that they were using, they were on like a ship, and we went into the captain's quarters, and she was like, and some of the players were like, "There's 5 chairs." So she knew that we were coming, and there's 5, and I was like, "There's 6 of us," and they're like, "So she must have put a chair aside, which means she didn't expect one of us to want to sit down." I was like, "No, she just you're jumping through hoops to try and confirm your own bias as to what it's on the map. It's just 5 chairs on the map."
Exactly, because that's what they randomly put down. But you see, so that's the one power. The other thing is that if I'm running a player character campaign, so where it's the player character's goals that need to be achieved, they're the ones telling me the story. So my villains and things, if they're in this region, I will go, okay, well, I will have a villain here, and the villain's plan is to steal the princess. I can drop some things in, but if the player characters don't bite, it doesn't affect me. The villain goes and he steals the princess, but
Yeah.
they don't ever hear about that because otherwise I'm
Yeah.
playing with myself, and no one wants
Yeah.
to see me do that, right? So it's more a case of if they interfere with the villain. Well, his plan was to steal the princess, so now what is he going to do with this interference? In the case of an epic campaign, though, where it is this grand narrative and it's Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings, get the ring to
Yeah,
Mordor
yeah.
type of thing, that's then where the plan is much more complicated, and as a result, the players' interferences and things you can drop in stuff as the players are doing their things, and the nemesis just takes longer to react. And you look at something like Lord of the Rings, and you go, Sauron was a bit of an idiot, to be perfectly honest with you. He sent out his ring wraiths. They tried once or twice. They got beaten up by the elves, and he's like, yeah, okay, fine. We'll
I'll
give
give
up.
up then, I guess.
Just stop sending people, right? I was like, you could have just sent your army marching across. No one would have stopped you. Trust me. Anyway, that's a whole different story.
The second half of that was there a really bad experience you've learned from?
Oh yes, really bad experience. Really bad experience is anytime a player sits down at the table and the first things out of their mouths are, "I like to kill things." And I've had that happen on a couple of occasions where the players sit down, and I will always ask if it's a convention game or if I haven't played with the people before, what type of game do you like playing? And occasionally I will get someone who goes, "Oh, I just like to hit stuff."
Yeah.
And you know that you are in for a game. There is no subtlety. There is just this idiot trying to kill stuff. And if you've got a mixed bunch of players who don't want to do that, and you've got this one player character, this one player, it becomes a laborious effort to deal with that individual and to go, okay, I need to decoy you away with the useless combat whilst the rest of the role players get to have a role playing experience.
That's the thing, is you might be tempted to go, okay, we'll have a combat. The combat lasts an hour. They'll be satiated for a while. Then we do the role play, the exploration, the merchants, the whatever, this quest stuff, and then we have another combat. But no. As soon as the combat's over, they'll be wanting another combat because they're no longer hitting things. And so the real way to deal with it is either don't do that because you need to have a group where all of them are wanting combat incessantly, or as you say, you've kind of got to distract them with a solo combat or something over there that they're hitting or doing something. Or
and it makes the game, it takes it away from being something that is fun to play to, it just makes it real and goes, this is a job. Yeah. You are a monkey, you are being paid to dance, and now you have to dance. Because that just fills my soul. I'm like,
that's the other thing that can be a little harder, is that a lot of GM tips and tricks and things that I see on YouTube or anywhere is like, you should be having just as much fun as the players, and you should be this and that and the other. And then quite often, as kind of like a footnote, they go, unless you're a paid GM, unless you're doing this professionally, and then you just you just do it. And I'm like, unfortunately that's the case. I'm a paid GM, so a lot of my GM tips and tricks and things don't quite apply, or they apply with an asterisk. You're doing a job, and you should enjoy it, and you should whatever, but you also just need to give them the game that they want to play.
Yeah.
All right. Speed round. Fancy Unicorn asks, how far out are you planning things? I think that would be in reference to like your business stuff rather than your games. Like, how far out are you planning things? Are you like 5-year plan, 10-year plan of how to be a great GM?
I don't think 10-year. I mean, we were actually talking about this yesterday. 10-year plan is insane because you're like, well, who knows what's going to happen in the next 5.
Yeah, you look at the last 3 and you're like, who could have planned for any of that?
Yeah, exactly. No, our biggest plan is coming up next in September is the release of the Kickstarter for Mage Hunter, which is the fantasy version of the Dice's role-playing system. And our goal with that is to take that and Bounty Hunter, which is sci-fi, and to develop them out because they've been so popular. Is to go, okay, cool. Let's build out a proper setting book for both of those. Let's do a monsters book for them. Let's make this. I think really to achieve a goal that a lot of role players have is to go, I wrote this role playing system, and it's not just a 5-pager that I printed on my computer. This is 3 hardcover books that have got amazing artwork in them. That for me is the next 5-year goal, I guess.
Excellent.
And to carry on making videos and being relevant.
to keep the finger
That's
on the
fairly
pulse,
important
hopefully.
too. Yeah.
Changeling asks, how as a player can you help engage players that are only active during combat? For some player GM, how to be a great player.
Yeah. That is the next book for next year, by the way. So it's a pretty good question to ask. Yeah. I always maintain...
They're a plant.
I
don't buy it. That's Derek's alt, and they're just gonna...
Yeah, exactly. Damn. We've been discovered, Derek. Drop the call. Yeah, damn. I would say that you have to look at it from two perspectives. Sometimes players are there just to have fun during combat, and they don't feel comfortable doing the other stuff. They don't want the limelight of having to talk or solve puzzles and that sort of thing. I think finding that out first is really important. But a lot of players go, well, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to role play. I don't know. It's weird. I don't know what to do. Then the onus, I would say, on you as the player is to, in character, go to that other player's character and have conversations with them. Because that's something that we don't often do, is go, we've slain dragons and we've done this and we've done that, but where did you grow up?
Yes, exactly.
We don't ask that question.
Exactly that. That's what I would say as well. Is as the player, you have the ability that the dungeon master doesn't always have, unless there's a DMPC or an NPC that happens to be around you or whatever. And even then, it's going to be like from the combat player's perspective. That's going to be, is this guy someone I can hit or someone I don't? It's you have the ability as the player to be like, oh, the combat player knows that you're not a person that they can just combat with, so you approaching them, it immediately has this, you're already like under that layer, you're already past that defense, and go and you can now role play with them, try and get them into role playing a bit more, ask them about who they are, ask them some of those sort of prompting questions, those hot seating questions that help flesh out a person. What's your favorite color? Why do you always buy this when we go to the bar and you never try this or whatever? Have you ever tried so and so jerky, the ostrich jerky?
Right.
I've actually got some here.
Exactly. And I think that the other major thing is that is one of the areas of role playing in most systems for which there is absolutely zero benefit in doing, other than making a much better story and a much better game.
Yeah.
All of the other stuff, combat, you get experience points for killing monsters, or you get treasure, or you get rewards. There's a game mechanic that rewards you for doing those things. Very few role-playing systems have a game mechanic for asking about a person's favorite color in character.
Yeah.
So it's that one space where the min-maxers go, but I can't benefit from doing this, other than having a good time. Yeah. And you're like, oh my God, well, we don't want that. Don't have a good time. No, heaven's sakes.
Some of my very favorite groups to GM for, I end up giving them like a good guy's discount on the amount that I charge them, and I end up like doing like a 6-hour game instead of a 4-hour game, just because they're so fun at role playing. They will all 5 of them will just, at the drop of a hat, they'll be like, one of them's like a step away from being a LARPer because he's constantly bringing like swords and shing with like a whiteboard eraser, and he's doing this as he's talking around. And then one of them went out and bought like pipes for him and the other human that are always having pipes while they're smoking around a campfire, and so they both sit there and they have this like role play, like 1-to-1 hour to hour kind of conversation in game. So like our games tend to just be like one day of adventuring, because they spend so much of it just like actually talking and role playing and asking, just enjoying themselves in character. It's such a fun game to be a part of. I love it. Very little intelligence asks, how do you keep a player engaged in adventuring when all they want to do is go back to their hometown where there's nothing for them? If they're playing one of these players where they're like, well, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. I don't have anything
Well, that's the one option, or the other option is I have no reason to stay with the party, so I'm just going to go home.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, that's true. That's a two-way street, in my opinion. The player has to be aware that they are playing a cooperative game, and that by demanding that they go home, they are not playing a cooperative game. They're playing a solo game, right? Which in itself is a great thing to do. You could suggest, hey, let's do a solo game. One of my favorite games was with this friend of mine who lives in Australia. He was a Jedi. He crashed on a planet, and it was just him and me. He was the player, and it was about him surviving on this planet and trying to get out. And that was a great game. So you can do that.
Yeah.
So firstly, the player has to understand that it's a cooperative space. So having that conversation with that player is very useful. And I have had to do it on a few occasions where you go, hey, bud, I understand that your character would want to do this, but you need to also figure out how you as the player are going to play the character so that they don't want to do that. They see some value.
Yeah.
Maybe they're missing, what are they missing from home? They're missing their family. Well, maybe they realize that this group is their family. So now that urge to go home is not necessarily going to be so strong. Yeah. So work through that. That's the one side. The other side is, as the GM, if you are not presenting options to the player characters that are engaging or that are interesting.
Yeah.
If they are constantly going, nah, I know the princess needs rescuing from the tower, but I don't really care. It means that they are looking for a different game.
Yes.
And you're not on the same path. You're not on the same wavelength. And that's a fault from the session 0, where it's like, well, I want to play heist games, and the players are like, no. We don't want to do any heisty stuff. We want to do, action adventure.
And it's why
so that's that disconnect too. I think
it's why check-in sessions are important as well. That people like naming them session zeros, I've always found, gives people the impression that it happens once before you start the campaign, and that's it. And if you're playing with if you're playing with people, especially who haven't played a lot before, they might go, yeah, heist game sounds fun, and then you run a couple of heist missions, and they're like, eh. And you find that they're just not into it. And if you don't have check-in sessions every few sessions, every few months, whatever it is, to say like, what sort of game do you like to play? what is and isn't appropriate for our table?
I completely agree with you. And something that I tell people that sometimes surprises them is that, generally speaking, after 2 or 3 sessions, I will be talking to my players going, is this still enjoyable? Are you still having fun? And they're
you've got a taste of the sort
You're
of
still
game
asking.
I am.
Yeah, exactly. I've been playing for 20 years. I still can't tell if people are enjoying it or not. Because we all respond so differently.
Yeah, I had a guy for a while that was just like the most silent type, and he would just like...
Yes.
But he always turned up at the right time, and he was always there, and he had his character sheet written out, and it wasn't just like a printed one. He'd made his own, like he'd written what was important to him to remember in the places he needed it and stuff. And like he obviously thought about it when we leveled up, that he'd like, oh, I'm going to take the charger feat, and then he actually used the charger feat in the next battle and things. And I was like, okay, he's enjoying it. And I had to tell myself he's enjoying it. He's not enjoying it in the way that I'm used to. But he's enjoying it. He's turning up and he's having fun the way that he has to have fun. He's only ever speaking in his character in third person and stuff, and that's the way that he's enjoying having fun. Yeah. Last question then, and then I'll let you go. Harlequin says, how do you hold the players together if they are splitting constantly along the same lines and one group keeps losing out? How do you hold the players together if they're splitting constantly along the same lines?
Yeah.
I assume like if there's got like 2 people that are like rogue and stealthy monk or something, and they're going, oh, we'll sneak in and do this thing, and they'll sneak into the thing ahead of the fighter and the barbarian maybe, and then
could be that, or it certainly could be something like that. In that case, of course, I think the challenge is I just wouldn't plan for them to stay together. I would plan for them to split up, but make sure that there are instances where they have to work together in order to stay together, right? So if you have the sneaky rogue and the monk, they disappear off. The paladin and the cleric and whoever else is loud and noisy, you need to give them something to do as well. I love split parties. Split parties move a lot faster than a single party does, because your committee sizes have got smaller.
Cover ground.
So decision making.
And you don't have to you don't have to spend 20 minutes being like, oh, we should.
Yes. So I roll into split parties, and a lot of my older players, they're like, 7 minutes and you split the party. I'm like, I split nothing. You guys chose to go in different directions. Like, yes, but you made it so that it was interesting to go in different directions. I'm like, that's not my fault. That's your choice. Anyway,
I'm always going to make the world interesting. It's up to you to follow whichever threads you want to follow.
Exactly. You go where you want to. Having said that, though, if it's more along the lines of the players themselves are disagreeing and splitting apart, I've had that too, where great friends in real life sit around the table and then they just split the party in terms of ideology and
Right.
end up in quite heated, quite personal debates.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you two are just never allowed to role play at the same table.
Yeah.
I'll role play with you and I'll role play with you, but I will not role play with you both at the same table. And
Yeah.
once we did that, it was great
Right.
because the party dynamic changed and it was just the one person that shifted to a different group. Everything just sort of worked its way out. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, depending on what that
I've had
question was.
instances before where I've had to not stop the game. It didn't get to a point where I had to stop the game, but definitely where I had to check in after the game to be like, did that get out of character, or was that all
Yes.
of that heated discussion that was in character? And
Who was
yeah, who was shouting? Was it your character or was it you? And it was because, as I mentioned earlier, this chat. It was one of these difficult topics. It was like a racial thing. They basically found a bunch of paintings. They thought they were paintings of like head and shoulders of these various different people in this hag's house, and then they realized, oh, these are people that have been sucked into the painting, and the portrait is of them.
Right.
And if they smash one, they let that person out. And they went down and they were like saving these people, smashing them, letting them out, and talking a little bit at a time, like, who are you? How did you get stuck in a hag's painting? And they got to this orc painting, and they smashed it, and the orc was like, I was just raiding elven villages, and then I came across this house, and blah, blah, blah. And one of them just immediately attacked him, and the half-orc in the group was like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? That's orcish culture, that's
Excuse
normal
me?
for us. And
Yes.
suddenly it kicked off this whole debate about, like, is that racist to attack the guy for attacking elves just because he was an orc? Is he attacking him just because he's an orc? And then, like, it got into a really big sort of heated thing in character, and after that session I was like, was that all in character? And everybody was like, oh yeah, it was all in character, but still it was very interesting. And you have to be like, is this you have to constantly have your finger on the pulse and be like, is it what at what point do I call
GM,
this?
you kind of create these monsters. You're like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this or not. It's cool, but I shouldn't really be.
I enjoy
relishing the
giving
fact
you.
that people are-
Yeah, I enjoy giving you moral quandaries and like, oh, maybe you
Yes.
should save the girl, but maybe you shouldn't. And
Yes.
but then now now I'm regretting it.
Yes.
Anyway, this has been an absolute delight, and I could talk to you for a lot longer, I'm sure. But let's round off this short rest by letting people know who you are, where they can find you, and what they can expect from you in the future and things. Plug all of your stuff.
All right. Well, the best place to find me is on www.greatgamemaster.com. All one word, greatgamemaster.com, where you'll have links to all of the other stuff that we do. And I suppose Patreon, patreon.com/greatgamemaster. We're writing a book together. The patrons have just chosen the principal characters, and chapter 1 will be dropping at the end of the month. And then they get to vote on where the chapter goes, basically. So that's quite fun and
exciting
interactive experience. And we're sort of pulling together all of the DM advice that I give and going, okay, so remember when I spoke about this concept? Well, now we're going to apply it to the chapter and let's see what it does. So that's quite exciting. And yes, the next Kickstarter for Mage Hunter, the diceless role-playing system, will be coming out in September. So watch our social media stuff for announcements on that. Super exciting, super interesting. So there we are. Otherwise, go onto YouTube and type Great GM and you'll find me.
You've
been there long enough.
If you are here from Guys Community, or you've just stumbled across this some other how, I'm Robert Hartley GM. I'm all of the internet at Robert Hartley GM. I'm the dungeon master for a comedy group called Viva La Dirt League on YouTube, where we have an actual play, but it's only half-hour episodes, and it's based in basically comedy with green screen cutaways of what's happening at the table. So it's a little bit of a point of difference there among many other actual plays. I am also the writer for a comedy skit series called D&D Logic, where we just sort of make fun of some of the things that happen in the game if you were to apply them to the real world. And you can find me here on Twitch at Twitch Tales. At twitch.tv/Robert Hartley GM, where we play Twitch Tales on a Sunday, which is an interactive game of D&D where the chat control as a hive mind the actions of the main character. It's sort of a solo mission campaign kind of thing, and everybody works together or doesn't, as the case may be, to try and decide where that character's going and what they're doing. I also do a bunch of other D&D related things, so find me where you find anybody at Robert Hartley GM. Thank you very much for joining me. It has been an absolute pleasure. I think I've finally finished my flowery drink, and I'm ready to go and try and find this library. What about you?
Yes.
Are we done with our short rest?
absolutely.
Do you get your spells back?
Yes.
Are you hit dice?
Yeah. I think we can go to the library, but just before we go to the library, I'd like to go and speak to a merchant about getting a bargain on buying a single dagger.
Yeah, and I also wanted to know. I might need to cast Find Familiar later, and so I need another 10 gold piece of. So I want to grab that before we go. But we'll get out there soon, I'm sure.
We'll definitely get to the library soon.
And thank you very much to the mods for being here. Thank you to all of you guys for your questions. Sorry if we didn't get to any of them, but hey, we're already over time. That's just how these things go. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Hey there, I'm talking to you. You rock. Thank you for watching my stuff. Really appreciate it.